Hello and welcome to One Week, One Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss every year of film history in order, starting in 1895, the dawn of cinema, and we've made it all the way up to 1935. That's this week. I am one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I'm a film projectionist, and joining me as always is...
I'm Glenn Cobell. I'm a filmmaker.
We're halfway through the 30s, baby!
Yeah. We're what? This is the 40th year we've covered?
Oh.
Am I doing my math correctly?
Might be. I'm not a math guy. I don't know.
1895 to 1935?
I am so bad at math. That's really all that you can take away here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're a podcast about old movies. We watch them all, so you don't have to.
No, you should also watch them, though,
Yes.
because some of them are good.
Yeah, I mean, we watch a lot of movies, and you definitely don't have to watch all of them, because that would be crazy.
But you don't have to do anything. You do whatever you want.
Yes.
Is what I say.
But
as
Glenn,
long as it is legal and moral.
Glenn, you do what I want and read the news now.
Okay. Very good.
The news of the year, 1935. It's the best thing since bottled beer. The first canned beer is sold. After stealing the concept from Lizzie Maggie and making a version with the opposite political message of the original, Parker Brothers begin selling the board game Monopoly. In violation of the Treaty of Versailles, Adolf Hitler rearms the German military and begins conscription to the Wehrmacht. Reza Shah renames Persia to Iran. 300,000 tons of Dust Bowl topsoil are lifted into the air by a severe dust storm. Black Sunday. Japanese-occupied Korea. Sun Myung Moon claims to be the next prophet after Jesus and becomes the figurehead of the Mooney Christian sect. Joseph Stalin cuts the opening ribbons on the first subway line in the Soviet Union. As part of the New Deal fighting against the Great Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt signs the Social Security Act into law. Within 10 days, new land and air speed records are set at 301 and 352 miles per hour, respectively. The Nazis' evil plot moved forward as they passed the Nuremberg laws, which revoke Jewish citizenship. Berliner Regina Jonas becomes the first woman to be ordained as a rabbi. 20th Century Pictures and Fox Film Corporation merge into 20th Century Fox. For your consideration, the first advertisement for an Academy Award appears in trade magazines.
And that is some of the news of 1935.
Yeah. We cut out some of the darker stuff.
Which, as we do almost every time. Just like, ugh, too much of a bummer.
Yeah, the person who was ordained as a rabbi in Berlin, not good things happened to her, actually.
Well, we touch on that in the other news segments.
Oh, just the Nazis?
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about them.
Yeah, but first, We'll start with Nazis. We'll get the Nazis out of the way first. But let's do Micky Mouse. We'll do a Micky Mouse Nazis Frankenstein sandwich.
A sentence that has never before been spoken.
Breaking new ground on 1 week, 1 year. Let's get into 1 week, 1 reel.
Yeah, do some shorts. More cartoons, because those are kind of usually the most notable shorts that are happening around this time.
And also I want to watch cartoons, and I don't want to watch not cartoons.
It feels very kind of classic old Hollywood to be like, we're gonna, because I did a sort of like, I'd watch a cartoon and then watch one of the movies, and like I didn't watch them both at once. I tried to pair them with different movies.
Oh, what'd you pair them with?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, let's start with Micky Mouse, as we said, which is the band Concert.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first Micky Mouse cartoon that is in color.
And not just any color, but 3 strip technical. 3 whole colors in this thing.
3 whole strips, 3 whole colors.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is very bright and colorful and nice. We've seen earlier Disney 3-strip joints with
the talking tree one.
Yes.
The dancing tree one.
Flowers and Trees, the Disney short from a couple years ago, that began an exclusive deal that they had to have access to 3-strip Technicolor with animation. They had only done it in their Silly Symphonies series originally, and this is the first Micky Mouse So we get to see those bright red shorts, the iconic bright red shorts that everybody's been talking about lately.
Yeah. And are not yet in the public domain. They won't be until 2035? No, sooner than that. But
yeah, sooner than that, because it's a 95 year thing, right?
Yeah.
now.
It's very vibrant. Like, the colors in this are very striking, as I think most early Technicolor things are.
Yeah, it looks great. The restoration and new scan, or whatever you would call it, on Disney Plus looks beautiful.
Yeah. 1935 was also the first in quotes 3-strip Technicolor feature film, but we did not watch it because it didn't seem that interesting other than that little factoid. Mickey Mouse is a conductor, and Donald Duck tries to join the band and no one likes him, so they have a fight, and then there's a tornado.
That's basically it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that this was in the great pantheon of conductor-based humor in animation. We
sort of more like Mickey Maestro.
Oh, snubbed for the Golden Globe. Mickey Maestro.
This is stacked here.
We have Barbie. We have Oppenheimer. We have Barbie in the most outstanding achievement in the field of regular movie.
in the field of making money. Yeah.
What is this Barbie and Oppenheimer you speak of? We're in the year 1935, Glenn.
Oppenheimer, isn't he that like Berkeley professor?
All right, let's get back to the mouse.
I have a friend named Barbara.
Barbara and Oppenheimer go to Vista Del Mar.
I'd watch that.
Yeah, this is a la Tom from Tom and Jerry and Bugs from Bugs and Bunny. We have another
Bugs and Bunny?
That's his name, right? Bugs and Bunny.
Yeah, the two characters, Bugs and Bunny.
We have some conductor-based humor, which is basically like, you move the stick really fast because there's a bee in your way, and then everybody starts playing really fast.
Melted ice cream in your jacket.
That was good. That was a good joke. That was a laugh out loud moment for me, because I think Donald throws ice cream at Mickey, and then it passes Mickey. It goes into somebody's like tuba, and then the tuba player spits it back out of the tuba, and then it goes down Mickey Mouse's back, and it's this really good animation of him just being like, ugh, ugh.
At first I thought, is this the first Donald Duck appearance? It's not. But in like trying to read about early Donald Duck, it seems like a lot of early animated shorts kind of present the Donald Duck as almost like a foil to Mickey Mouse, like an antagonist almost, which he kind of is in this.
Yeah.
But I don't really understand why no one likes Donald, other than he has kind of an annoying voice. It's like he's very good at playing the flute. I don't know why everyone's he's like, you're not part of the band. Get out of here.
Playing a different song than they're trying to play, like over their song, and that's why Mickey's getting mad.
I don't know. Maybe I missed the point of the entire thing, but I was sort of like, let him in. He's good at it.
Yeah. Let off-model Donald in.
Yeah. The thing I'd noticed about this is I feel like as animation is like developing and like kind of getting more streamlined, it does feel like it's losing a little bit of that like wacky cartoon reality from like really early animation, like from Steamboat Willie, where it's like anything is anything. Any object is also a person and can talk, and or like some of that like fluidity of reality I feel like is starting to go away a little bit.
Maybe. I'd like to see how some Fleischer stuff from around now compares, because yeah, I think this Disney stuff is very smooth. It's less surreal. It's kind of finding its way into the Disney that we know. You know, we just saw Popeye, and it seems like the Fleischer brothers are doing stuff that's a bit more zany, right? At least until they get to their rotoscoped Superman era, where.
But I'm so excited. I've seen some of those, and they're so cool.
Yeah. There is some really impressive animation in this, though. In particular, like, I'm not an animator or an artist, but my understanding is that when you're doing 2D animation, making things rotate is one of the more difficult things to do. And the entire end of this is the band all spinning around in circles inside of a tornado that picks them up.
Yeah.
It looks really nice.
Because I almost feel like I see more of that in this like early animation than in sort of like 50s cartoons, which is probably most of what I've seen is like 50s, 60s stuff, like Disney and Warner Brothers animation.
And Hanna-Barbera, which are known for their
Cheapness.
Yeah.
But it does kind of feel like a lot of this early like Disney and Fleischer Brothers stuff is like showing off a bit of like, look at what we can do.
Yeah,
which is cool to see.
This is an era of a lot of excess in terms of set design and scope of giant of live action movies. And I think this is an era where the animation people are really just trying to push themselves to do really impressive stuff and go as hard as they can, basically.
Yeah. There was a bit towards the end where the chairs they're sitting on start running. And that made me happy. I was like, okay, there's still some good silliness here of the chairs being alive.
Yeah. Have we watched any Mickey Mouse since Steamboat Willie? I don't think we have. Right?
I don't think so. No.
And after Steamboat Willie, there was more or less like a Mickey fever. Like, he was extremely popular, and I think this short that we're seeing, which is 7 years later, we have missed 7 years of Mickey Mouse. But he's already become somewhat of the more bland Mickey that we're used to.
Right, he doesn't have quite that mean edge that he does in Steamboat Willie.
Yeah,
he still loves playing music though. Just in he at least he's moved on from animals to actual instruments, so that's a nice change.
So much of this early cartoon stuff is music based, right? It's all about the novelty of sound in many ways, and so it's like, look, we're gonna play a song, we're gonna conduct a song, we're going to sing a song, all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Speaking of cartoon music, we also watched a Warner Brothers short called I Haven't Got a Hat. This is the first Porky Pig appearance.
Yes. This is Merry Melodies, I believe. Yes. Looney Tunes was black and white up until the 40s. But Merry Melodies was doing occasional color shorts, and this one is a 2-strip Technicolor because Disney had exclusive license to 3-strip.
Those bastards.
And so it's cool seeing this style in 2-strip.
Yeah, it is. It's just this did feel a little bit like the animation is maybe a little bit less like slick than the Disney one.
It's rougher, certainly.
Yeah. But still like very sort of like 1930s style of like rubber hose arms and that sort of thing. The sort of very bare bones plot of this one is there's a recital at the animal school, and Porky Pig, famously good at public speaking, has to recite a little speech.
Yeah, this is kind of a not fully formed Porky here. Of course, he looks different than we're used to in his first short, but he also, his bit is just that he stutters, and not that he stutters and then changes what he's saying.
Right, which didn't. Am I thinking of something else, or did that
happen? Broadway Melody.
That was in Broadway Melody, right? Yeah, that exact bit.
Yes. It seems like maybe, as with a lot of comedy things that seem to just exist in the air, maybe it's like a vaudeville type bit.
It's almost definitely a vaudeville. That seems like such a vaudeville thing. Another funny thing about this is like Porky Pig is like, oh, Porky Pig, classic Warner Brothers character. But then there's a bunch of other anthropomorphic animals that I'm like, never heard of this guy. Oliver Owl, Beans the cat. I'm like, what happened to all these people?
I mean, around this era, Beans the cat was their flagship guy.
There you go. I had never heard of Beans the cat. I do think it's funny that when they show Porky Pig sitting in class reading, he's reading Custer's Last Stand.
It's a weird choice. I'm not really sure what the joke is there.
Like, is that just a joke that it's like, why would he be reading this, or is that like some reference to, I don't know. I think I actually found this one funnier than the Mickey Mouse one. Like, the jokes were better.
Yeah.
There's a turtle playing his shell as drums, which is great. There's a very shy, I think, cat or mouse who's trying to recite Mary Had a Little Lamb and keeps looking over to the teacher to get hints. And that leads to some really good bits.
It's just
a cat and a dog have a fight inside of a piano, and it because they're fighting, the piano starts playing a tune, and it's like a better tune than the piano player was playing.
That's Oliver Owl playing the piano, and Beans put the non-anthropomorphic cat. The anthropomorphic cat picked up the non-anthropomorphic cat and put it inside of the piano.
Yeah.
To try and mess with Oliver Owl because they're rivals. Yeah.
But see, then at the end, we're like, all right, the end of a Merry Melodies cartoon, Porky Pig's in here. And then a jester comes out and says, "That's all, folks."
We get it, that's all, folks, but it's not Porky.
It's his first movie. He hadn't got the gig yet. I guess that comes later.
The job of that jester.
Yeah, they're like, who is this jester now? The unsung jester of early Warner Brothers animation.
Tomb of the Unsung Jester. As part of this petty rivalry between Beans and Oliver Owl, so they end up like kind of throwing ink and paint on each other, and they are green ink and red paint, which are the only two bright colors that they can make, really, in this two-strip world. It really emphasizes the two-strip nature of it because like those are the two colors.
Yeah.
It's some good gags. It's definitely it feels more amateurishly made than the Disney thing. The Disney thing is like polished.
Yeah. But at the same time, I felt like kind of the humor felt a little bit stronger in this one.
Yeah.
To me anyway.
This is not Mel Blanc playing Porky. It's someone named Joe Daughtry, who they cast specifically because he had an actual stutter, and he had to stop playing Porky at some point because his stutter got unmanageable, and then he was recast with Mel Blanc.
That's rough. That it's like you're cast for your specific manner of speaking, and then they're like, never mind, it's too much.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly like whether it was him or them that cut it off, but yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, he's just doing his thing, I guess. God, he's just doing his thing instead of doing a bit the way that Mel Blanc does it.
Yeah. Well, shall we get to our feature presentation?
Let's get so excited. Let's get to our feature presentation.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
So we're jumping right in the deep end, huh?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, great.
Let's jam with some Nazi stuff over here.
I mean, it's topical. It's timely for then, but I mean, it's kind of for now too.
This is Triumph of the Will.
Yep.
The famous Triumph of the Will.
The infamous.
True.
Propaganda / documentary in quotes.
Docu-ganda. Yes.
Docu-ganda, I guess. That is probably maybe the best word for it. Directed by Leni Riefenstahl.
Yeah.
Who, she had directed movies before this, but was mostly an actor.
Yeah.
Previously, I thought.
She'd also directed Nazi movies, like Nazi propaganda movies before this as well. But yeah, she was big Nazi lover. Certainly, and you can see that on the screen.
Oh, can you?
This is another one of those movies like Birth of a Nation that I've heard a lot of people say like it's horrible, but you have to the what it's doing is terrible, but you have to respect certain aspects of it.
I will say, in comparison to The Birth of a Nation, which I thought is very notable for like the effect it had on culture, but like as a movie and like from its technical perspective, it wasn't that far off from like other D.W. Griffith movies that he'd already made or made around the same time.
Yeah, it's a more excruciating D.W. Griffith movie.
It's just kind of like more hateful than the rest of his movies. But this at least this does have a sort of real kind of like technical, I don't know, panache to it. Like this is a well-made piece of propaganda.
Yeah. I think I took in the 1915 episode, I took delight in knocking down Birth of a Nation as an
Right.
actually bad movie.
Not so good.
This movie is not, it's not a bad movie, and
Well,
like the shots are, well, yeah,
It's a little long-winded, I'll say that much.
yeah,
You can kind of tune a lot of it out.
the things that people say, you hate it, but you gotta respect it for Birth of a Nation. That's like, you don't actually have to respect it. Like, it didn't actually do that stuff that history says that it did. This,
Other than the sort of like cultural impact that it had, which is real, but also
Yes.
makes it worse. Like,
yeah,
it was a very negative cultural impact.
this movie, I think the reasons why people bring it up as worth looking at, influential,
As
valuable,
an important piece of cinema.
right? They are. I think they're onto something a bit more with this movie.
Yeah, it feels a bit more valid, kind of.
Of course, it is still a Nazi film, and I think also a lot of what people take away from this movie is less the filmmaking and more the blocking of the parade, basically.
Yeah,
It's a movie that does a very good job of capturing very good architecture and blocking.
it looks really good. Like, it's very well shot and it's very well edited, for the most part. I think it is too long and is very like redundant at times,
Yeah.
where it's like, we get it, it's a parade. I've
get
seen a
it,
lot of
you love
Nazis
Hitler.
marching. Like, I don't need to see 1,000 more marching shots.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, here's like a great shot of like big ol' flags. Great shot of flags.
Yeah.
I'll give you that much.
But that's the thing, right? It's like, these are giant flags specifically, they made big flags, and the big flags are impressive, and then they just shot them, right?
Right.
I watched Dan Olson's video on Triumph of the Will.
I have not.
Breaking down the editing and everything like that. And he says it's less of a triumph of filmmaking and more of budget and scale, right? Where this is a movie that was commissioned by the Nazis to make themselves look cool, and they spent hideous amounts of money on it to make themselves look really cool. So this movie is full of shots of enormous crowds of Nazi lovers.
They love their crowd size, obsessed with it.
And it's trying to show, how much support they have, right? Because they're only just seizing power now, and there's probably a lot of people who are not feeling so good about the Nazis.
Yeah.
So
ostensibly, this movie is documenting a 4-day rally, basically, in Nuremberg, which seems like a bunch of speeches and a bunch of parades. I think they call it Party Day, which is rich. Not that kind of party. I think it's like the party, because that's what Nazis actually called themselves. Nazi is inherently kind of a mocking and derogatory term. Did you know about this?
Maybe. Sounds kind of familiar.
I read up on it again after watching this, because I wanted to like fact check myself on that, kind of. There is a Twitter thread and later a Substack article by an author, Rebecca Mackay. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. About how the word Nazi began as like an insult against them. Like, it was in Germany, it was kind of shortened nickname for Ignaz, and then that name was sort of like used as an insult for like calling someone like a country bumpkin, or like the German equivalent of like a redneck. It's like calling someone Cletus.
It's Crazy and Ignaz, the comic strip characters. Also, maybe
that's the example that this article uses. Is like, it's as if there was a political party that everyone called Cletus's in the United States, and that's just what everyone calls them now. Even like neo-Nazis call themselves that, right. And it's like, but it started as this like, you dumb idiots. Which
Well,
I think is very funny that's just what the word everyone uses now. It's this like kind of mean nickname.
I mean, isn't that kind of just like the thing that they do, though? Fascists and Nazis in particular, they take other people's imagery and then claim it as their own, right?
True. Swastika, great example.
Yeah. The fascist way is to make it seem like all culture is about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to like go back to like 1930s and 40s things and like see how it's like that they don't call themselves Nazis. That's just what we do now. There's no real like narrative to this. It's mostly just like here's a bunch of speeches, here's a bunch of more flags, more parades.
Yeah, it's showing a grueling 4 days of Nazis not even hanging out, like Nazis standing in very ordered rows listening to Hitler give a speech.
Very orderly rows.
It does have this sort of obsession with orderliness, which is maybe extends to the Nazis in general. It's showing them as like imposing and having discipline and all this kind of stuff, where you're seeing these shots of either soldiers or even just regular people all standing in like perfect rows, perfect distances from each other. And it's you're in the camera, you're seeing 40,000 people doing this, right? And I was thinking, like, what if one of them has to go to the bathroom, you know?
Yeah.
Like
they don't get to.
No.
They're Nazis. They don't get to use the bathroom whenever.
No hall pass for Nazis.
Yeah. There is this kind of like the movie opens with like Hitler flying in and the plane landing and like the crowd going wild and him like on a like motorcade through Nuremberg. And there is this kind of like really like playing up like the celebrity of it. Which is, I don't know, just it's odd to see of just like here's the worst person who ever lived, and kind of like the presumably genuine sort of like celebrity that he held in at least parts of Germany in 1934. It's I don't know, it's like it's because the imagery is so celebratory, and yet it's celebrating this thing that is like I have such a like visceral gut reaction to it, like no, this is bad. It I don't know, it's just, it's weird.
Well, the movie
it's weird to see.
The movie does a lot to make it seem like the Nazis are not what they are, right? It's only very infrequently when they even mention race in this movie.
But when they mention it, it's mentioned in a very pointed way.
Yeah. But like I think this movie is trying to like sanitize Nazis a little bit.
Yes. It does feel that way.
It's trying to present them as non-threatening. Like they're in a lot of the Hitler speeches in it. He talks about how they don't want war, they want peace. Like
right
before
I believe
they invade Poland.
he says the guarantor of peace, to which I say my ass. Hitler.
So you know, along the lines of it being propaganda, it is lying to you actively.
Yes.
Not even just in its glorification of Nazis, but even in its portrayal of what a Nazi is.
Yeah, there is, I believe, only 2 mentions of sort of race in the whole thing, but they are both in a very kind of like we gotta keep it pure kind of thing. Like it's mentioned in a very Nazi-ish way.
Yeah.
And then throughout the whole thing, there's like lots of just like lovingly composed shots of blonde people,
little baby Nazis. There's a baby that
so many
Hitler.
kids in this, which is also like upsetting for many reasons. One, just of the whole way that like Nazis were very like focused on indoctrinating children, and like they were very like children of the future kind of, but in the worst possible way.
Right. I mean, there's a whole section that shows the Hitler Youth, and it almost evokes Kino Eye in a way, as like here are the young people who are very very on board for what the government is doing.
There's a definite kind of like Soviet film school influence on this, I think. But yeah, just like watching all the footage of like I don't know, like 12-year-old kids in this. It's like, how many of these kids died in World War II? That was 10 years after this.
Like, as soldiers.
Right. Like, they all like got on board. Like, hey, there's a parade. Let's go join up.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and then they all, froze to death in Russia.
I mean, I'm less concerned about them than the people that
No,
Nazis
true.
were killing.
Like, absolutely. But it's like, there's kind of this weird thing where you see all these kind of like, fresh-faced kids who are just kind of like, obviously I don't have
they're
as
being
much
indoctrinated.
sympathy
right.
for them as the kids who were just murdered. But it is, there's something kind of upsetting about that also.
Yeah. Yeah. You were speaking earlier about how they treat him like a celebrity, and to me it almost seemed like they were treating him like a king, right? Where they're like, I can't believe like his grace has touched me, or I can see him or whatever. And like, I think it maybe while I was watching this movie, a lot of what I was thinking about was like, what is going on in the minds of these average Nazis who, like, these average Germans who are like, oh my god, I'm so ready to welcome Hitler to my town, and I'm so excited to see Hitler. Like what's the appeal to them,
Right. Which is, I mean, I can relate that feeling to watching certain political rallies that are happening this year in the year 2024. I don't get what the appeal is. Like, why listen to this windbag? There's a whole section in Triumph of the Will about where it's like he's speaking to the kind of like the farming communities and like the laborers, and he's like, the workers, we love you. You're gonna make this a great nation. And I'm like, why are the blue collar laborers like into this? Like, this is so, he's such a kind of antithetical to what you think their values would be.
Well, I mean, they called themselves,
their flags are real big.
I mean, they called themselves National Socialists because you could
National Socialist Workers.
Yeah.
Like, that's part of the name. Yeah.
Because like you couldn't be elected in Germany. It was what I heard. What I understand is that like you couldn't be elected in Germany unless you signaled that you were socialist in some way, right? And so they just lied. They just called themselves something that they weren't. To get the support of farmers and whoever else.
I think it's like they used the word national to appeal to like right wing, and then socialist to appeal to left wing, and they were just like, let's just get everybody on board.
It's a big tent party.
Yeah. Oof. Very few tents. No shade in this movie.
There's an indoor hall where there's a lot of people watching a speech.
A lot of speeches in this movie, which I'm gonna be honest, I kind of tuned out. A lot of them. Like, I tried to pay attention because I wanted to engage with this as an actual like piece of filmmaking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like on the like 5th Hitler speech, I'm like, I get it. Like, he's talking his normal bullshit. I'm used to just tuning out his voice whenever I hear it, kind of. The same goes for all the other like Nazi leaders. They're all super sweaty. They all look it's like every leader in this movie who gives a speech looks like he's about to have a heart attack. Yeah, there are times in this movie I definitely lost focus of like watching it, just because I'm like, all right, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it, Lenny. You didn't need to use all the footage that you shot. There was a point I was going to make earlier about camera stuff and the sort of the grandiosity of this movie, and like how the speeches are being filmed, and like the crowds and all these things, and like how much of it is, there's a lot more long lens stuff in this movie than a lot of other movies from around the same time are doing. Probably partially because it is a semi-documentary, right? Like it's filming actual events occurring, and so having a long lens makes that easier to do. But then I think the movie is using that in a way to sort of create this sense of like grandeur or drama to it, of like the shot that like Michael Bay is kind of famous for, of like long lens moving around the subject, really low angle, like looking up at them, and so like the background is moving around like really fast, and there's this like it creates this sense of like, oh, this feels enormous. And there's that technique is not to the dramatic degree that Michael Bay uses it, but it's like that same sort of thing of like keeping the camera low whenever possible, shooting stuff in a longer lens, and like doing enough camera movement to kind of give a sense of like parallax, and it kind of gives it even greater scale because you're seeing everything kind of in relation to each other a bit more.
Well, yeah, the camera's always looking up at Hitler. He's either, even when it's close to him, it's looking up at him, and then a lot of the time he's on top of a really tall platform and it's looking up at him there. It's all of this stuff to make him seem grand, king-like, godlike, right? Like, apart from the ways that I think the kind of cinematic legacy that this movie has is mostly to do with the way that the crowd shots are composed, and how people have taken that, like riffed on that basically in Star Wars or other stuff.
So much Star Wars in this.
Yeah.
I've just just like framing. Or I'm just like, I have seen this in Star Wars, like this exact shot.
You know, I think Star Wars just suffers the typical kind of film school way of looking at this movie, which is apolitically, because Lucas used...
Well, he uses the framing for both, at least in the first movie, for both the rebellion and the Empire, kind of. Like, the whole medal ceremony at the end of Star Wars is, like, not shot for shot from this movie, but is, like, very, very... It seems like an almost one-to-one kind of reference point for, like, how it's framed. Which is a weird choice for Star Wars, because Star Wars is kind of such an otherwise like
movie.
Right, otherwise like very anti-fascist story. But then like all other Star Wars movies are also definitely taking a lot of like Imperial March stuff. Like even the opening music in this movie, I'm like, this sounds like the Imperial March from Star Wars. And I'm sure that that's not an accident. Like that seems like a very natural reference point for John Williams to be like, sure, I'll take that.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the beginning of this movie, like the other kind of filmic thing that I think is talked about the most with this is the beginning of the movie, which is from the point of view of the plane carrying Hitler down from the clouds,
down from
like,
the serene clouds.
Yeah, it starts with this very kind of, I don't know, very kind of relaxed, serene, placid, just like, let's look at clouds for a minute and a half, right? But it's this almost like, look at the realm of the gods, of the Valkyries or something like that, and then watch the great Hitler like come down from the clouds to you, right?
Yeah.
So it's doing all of this stuff with the angles and that scene of just making him seem like a god. You know, we're talking about the way that it's used apolitically, and there are a lot of aspects of this movie that, like we were talking about, like they're hiding what they're doing and truly saying, and a lot of it is sort of apolitical.
He does kind of try to retcon the Night of Long Knives in one of the speeches, where he's talking to like the current leader of like the sort of like sub organization of Nazis that he had killed. And he's like, why? Like, I don't disagree with them. Like, we're friends now. Look, like we're both up here on stage. Like, it's all great. And I'm like, is it?
I didn't
like you just had a bunch of
rival.
those dudes murdered. So when I was paying attention to the speeches, there was definitely like, there's points where Hitler tries to kind of like frame himself as an underdog, and I'm like, fuck off, get out of here. Yeah, there is like definitely with the benefit of historical hindsight, you can see the seams of like where they're kind of talking around certain things and like trying to like take emphasis away from certain things and put it onto like, no, this is about like German culture and heritage, and I'm just like, no, it isn't.
It might have been less clear at the time whether that was
and that's
case.
Like, again, it's like I see a lot of that in contemporary America, and it's like you'd think that people would have learned, but I guess not.
No, people don't learn their lessons.
No.
The points where I was most, you know, you were falling asleep during the speeches, but I think I was kind of getting lulled into a into a kind of chill sense during the marching, because it's just on and on and on marching, right? This movie is really only like 20 or 30% speeches, and the rest of it is just giant crowds and marching people, right? And there are points where you can just go like, oh, that's a pretty shot, that's nice, like that's wow, that's impressive. And then you see like 50,000 people say Sieg Heil, and you're like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, there's like a really lovely like composed frame of early on of like window shutters being opened and like a nice potted plant in a windowsill, and just two little Nazi flags stuck in the plant. And I'm like, this is such a, like a pretty shot of like a nice plant in a window, but it's like being used in this way of like, aren't Nazis grand? And I'm like, ugh, it's like, I feel like that was my biggest takeaway, is like kind of how pretty this movie is. Like, is like, it's how it's framed and how it's lit and shot and all that stuff, versus what it's actually filming is this thing that I find like deeply awful.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of the beginning of the movie it seems to be I'm not sure if it's technically Bavarian, but it seems like this town, this Bavarian architecture in this town. And so a lot of the beginning of the movie is focusing on this like classic German architecture, trying to like create a link between like German heritage and the Nazis.
It does feel like a lot of
pretty buildings, you know.
Yeah, a lot of the like the editing is sort of like trying to create associations, right, between things like that, of like, we're gonna show something like a bunch of like old classic German architecture and like people in like traditional like German folk clothing and things like that, and then like hard cut to those people like dancing with Nazi soldiers or like next to them or something, like to create this like association in someone's brain that like these are the same. And it's it's upsetting to see now. Post World War II, Leni Riefenstahl tried to defend this movie as like, it's purely a documentary, like there's no political agenda. I was just trying to document what was happening at the time. Which, first of all, whenever someone says like this isn't political, I call bullshit, because every piece of art is inherently political. Doesn't matter if you're trying, if you're not trying to, that doesn't change it. Like that, everything carries a certain political weight to it, despite intention. But even her defense doesn't hold up at all, because one, Hitler paid for this movie. You can't say that it's like there's no agenda behind it, because it's like the Nazis paid for it. And then also like Leni Riefenstahl was an active participant at the rally, so it wasn't like she wasn't like some German filmmaker just happened to like, I'm gonna bring a camera along and document this thing that's happening.
Like, and she's been on board this whole time, right? Like, exactly. In the Dan Olsen video, he talks about the previous propaganda documentary that Leni Riefenstahl made for the Nazis, which they did their best to scrub from existence, because it portrayed them as being friends with the people they had assassinated during the Night
like
of Flying
that
Knives.
Has a bunch of the people that got assassinated, right?
Apparently, I haven't seen it, but
and neither did I, but I also saw that it's like in like a few months after that movie was released, like half the people in that movie were killed.
And so, like, you know, she's continuing to participate, she's involved, like this is not that's ridiculous.
Something good to come out of this movie, I guess, or a thing that I enjoy that came out of this movie, besides Star Wars, that is somewhat more positive, is in 1942 there was a Movietone newsreel editor named Charles Ridley took footage from Triumph of the Will and recut it with a German cover of a song called The Lambeth Walk, which is from a musical, and it's like this incredibly like Cockney show tune thing. And there was like a whole dance craze in the late 30s, which is why a German cover of it even existed.
Was the dance craze goose stepping?
No, but apparent unsubstantiated. It's possible / likely that the Nazis hated the music. But so this newsreel editor in England took footage from this movie and recut it to that song as a sort of like anti-Nazi propaganda film.
Huh.
And it's very silly because it's like a bunch of goose stepping, but it's been like re-edited to like time with the music.
That's very YouTube era.
That's the thing, is it's like a really early example of like a remix / like shit post.
It's like the auto-tune the news of 1942.
That's what it feels like, and that we'll throw that up in the video version of this.
Wow, yeah,
probably
without
without audio. But we'll link it in like the show notes, which is like, I don't know, it's such a weird cultural artifact because it the way that it's edited feels very contemporary.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
Speaking of video of this, it is probably a good thing that it's like not super easy to get your hands on this movie. Like it exists, but it's not like people are just advertising like, "Hey, buy our copy of Triumph of the Will."
I mean, it's on DVD. Like, it's get it from the library, right?
But like the main people who are releasing it on Blu-ray and DVD are Synapse.
Oh yeah,
which is
weird,
an exploitation movie company. Which is like, I get that, you know, Kino has a release of Birth of a Nation, right, and it puts it in its context. And I'm sure there are a lot of racists who buy that Blu-ray, but like they're doing their best to avoid.
Right, they're not marketing it to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like this movie is being sold next to Frankenhooker. It's just like kind of a weird juxtaposition, you know?
It doesn't really feel like the right context for it.
A lot of the places also that I'd seen this movie uploaded on the internet, some of the comments are, "Thank you for uploading this. This is fascinating history. You know, oh, the Nazis were horrible," or whatever. And then like 1 out of every 10 is, "They were right. Thank you for doing this and uploading this, like this wonderful film," you know? And it's like, God.
I mean,
yikes.
it's the internet.
But it's like how do you deal with media this way? Like this?
Right. Yeah. And that's a good but also very big question.
Yeah.
Because it definitely should be preserved, and I think it should be like, people should see it. I mean, this is the second time I've seen this movie. I saw it when I was like, I don't know, 12 or 13 maybe.
You saw it when you were 12?
Maybe it was like 14, 15, I don't know. But I saw it when I was like an adolescent.
Mm-hmm.
Because my mom was like, "No, like you need to see this shit." Kind of like it's.
Yeah.
It was as part of my like history education, which I think it serves an important purpose in that, because then also when I see like certain right-wing political rallies that are like probably actively trying to ape this movie, I'm like, I see what you're doing.
I mean, you know, say what you will about the Nazis though, but they are much more dedicated to aesthetics than modern day conservatives are. Like, modern day conservatives have
look like dog shit.
Right. Like conservatives have very bad taste in like in art, right?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
So the stuff that they make looks like shit.
Yeah.
And like something that's interesting about this is that like the right-wing people of 30s Germany like had good aesthetic senses in some ways, you know?
Yeah.
And so they were able to make probably more effective propaganda and more beautiful movies, and not like, I don't know, the Christmas Carol that has like somebody goofing around playing what's his name? Michael Moore, and has Kelsey Grammer and all these other conservative, John Voight and all these other people in it. And like conservatives these days, they make movies that look like garbage.
Yeah.
Because they are garbage. And like,
I'm wondering how much, like, definitely a lot of the like boom of like good filmmaking that came out of like Weimar Germany was mostly spearheaded by like very left-wing intellectual
Jews.
Artists
who left.
Yeah, they were all Jewish and or gay, and they all left. But I'm curious how much of that like very fertile sort of like space for artistic expression kind of at least let someone like Leni Riefenstahl kind of like learn better craft.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
I wrote a few adjectives here while I was watching it, like showing the kind of like the, I don't know, two sides of this movie. Just captivating, boring, elegant, horrifying, imposing, and bland.
Yeah,
which
it is.
yeah.
It is a film full of contradiction in that way, for sure. Speaking of, oh boy, how to transition now.
Do we need a segue?
We could segue into something else that is dealing with sort of horror.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. Mostly because I don't know where else to place this other movie. Also because, spoilers, I think this was my favorite movie that we watched for this year. Not the Hitler one, the one that we're about to talk about. Bride of Frankenstein.
What a long wind up. Yes, it's hard to transition out of the Nazi movie into this, which is a pretty silly movie.
Yes. But also like a lot of things. We'll get into it.
So yeah, this is James Whale's reluctant return to Frankenstein.
But oh boy, what a picture this is.
Mm-hmm.
This was a movie that I think I had never seen it before watching it for this show, and it was always one of those things that it was like, oh, Bride of Frankenstein is like a masterpiece. Like you gotta check it out. Like it's way better than the original one. Yada yada yada. And I'm like, really? Like I don't know. I've seen like the clips of it and things, and it seems kind of silly. And I was like, all right, whatever. Like sure, I'll check it out. And it was always this sort of thing where it was like, oh, that movie is like so good. And I'm like, we'll see. And then I watched it and I was like, no, they were correct. This movie is great.
This is maybe, it's unclear to me like how much of this movie was made with the production code in mind. There was a quote from James Whale being kind of like warned about all of the deaths in it. There were originally 21 deaths in the movie, and they were cut down to 10 because James Whale said, "Kill them all and let Breen sort it out." Breen being the guy who is enforcing the production code. So it's like I don't know how much of this movie was made with the code in mind, but it is much lighter of a film than the original Frankenstein. Like I think it's overwhelmingly campy and silly, right?
Well, I don't know, that brings up the question of like, can camp be intentional, or does that ruin it? I don't think this movie is necessarily intentionally silly, but I do think you think so. I think it's intentionally like sort of melodramatic, I would say, and sort of like operatic, maybe in a sense, where it's like it's very. I think it's leaning even more into kind of like expressionism and kind of like that kind of filmmaking than the first Frankenstein movie.
Yeah, it definitely it has more of a control of imagery than the first Frankenstein movie. More thoughtfully put together, I think.
But I also think this movie is like weirdly kind of a better adaptation of the book Frankenstein than the first movie. Like a lot of the big scenes in this movie are taken from, and the entire concept of this movie is taken from the book.
And it also has Mary Shelley herself in the movie
too,
talking about Frankenstein.
Should we just start at the beginning and kind of hit the beats?
What better a place to start than the beginning?
I do think it's funny right at the start of this movie, it does the opening, the cast credits, and Boris Karloff is just credited as Karloff. Like he's reached such heights of fame that he's a single name person now. He's just Karloff. That's right. All I need to put.
And in the opening credits, it also does the same bit as they did in the original Frankenstein, where it said the monster is played by question mark.
But then it doesn't give it away. But then it's like, because Elsa Lanchester,
Worcestershire.
Yeah. Also plays Mary Shelley, and she is credited in the opening credits as Mary Shelley. So then it's
Yeah.
like, oh well,
Well,
okay.
Right, in this movie, it does like what says like something like the monster's bride, and then
Yeah. ...
question mark.
Which is,
So,
it's a good bit. I think
it's
that's
good,
kind of
yeah.
fun. But yeah, the movie opens on this great like miniature shot of a castle. Feels very Batman Returns, and there's like a little framing device of Mary and Percy Shelley in a castle during a thunderstorm talking to Byron, and then Byron has this sort of speech where he's like, "Oh, that book that you wrote, Frankenstein, so good." Kind of almost just to, like, remind the audience, like, "Hey, remember Frankenstein? Pretty great movie, huh?" And then they're showing clips of the first movie, which is extra funny because it's like,
Last time on Frankenstein.
right, but Byron is recapping the movie version, which is like almost completely different from the book. So he's like, "Hey, Mary Shelley, remember that book that you wrote where like there was a big windmill that caught on fire?" And it's like, that doesn't happen in the book, dude.
See, I haven't read the book, but this whole framing device of Mary Shelley talking about, she's like, yes, but I had some other stuff that I wanted to say about Frankenstein, and then justifying its own existence by inserting a fake Mary Shelley to say I wrote this.
Yeah.
But it felt very just this kind of like naked trying to justify its own existence.
Right. I'm just like, look, we know that like we did this like movie had a full ending, but like just go with us here.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, like there's more Mary Shelley stuff in this movie than the first Frankenstein movie, I think.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't I don't remember Mary Shelley in the first Frankenstein.
No, but
movie.
I mean just in terms of like stuff that she wrote.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Almost right away we get Una O'Connor, who was the loud old lady from The Invisible Man, is
doing
back.
her same bit here.
Same bit. James Whale loves Una O'Connor, and will just I like, on one hand I kind of get it because it's like, sure, but she's doing a lot, and I think this is part of what you're saying of how like this movie almost immediately feels a lot sillier.
Yeah, he wrote this part specifically for her, is what I heard.
But it's like I feel like everyone else is doing this sort of like more kind of controlled, like, drama, this is very serious, and Una O'Connor is playing this like it is a Monty Python sketch, is like playing it so big and so silly.
Yeah, I mean,
which isn't bad, but it doesn't feel like it's connected with the rest of the movie so much.
There was a special feature on the Blu-ray of the original Frankenstein that had an interview with Magneto. I don't know.
Ian McKellen?
Yes, Ian McKellen.
Yeah.
Had an interview with Ian McKellen where
Magneto. Gandalf was there talking about the movie.
Yeah, and then he was talking about, because he played James Whale in the biopic Gods and Monsters, which is named after a line from this movie.
Yeah.
And he was referring to some of the work that James Whale did as camp, right? He was thinking like James, this Ian McKellen is a gay man who was playing James Whale, who was a gay man in the 30s, right? And this feels very proto camp, very proto like intentional 60s and 70s gay like silliness,
But at the same time, I also got that from it, but at the same time it doesn't feel as kind of like intentionally silly, I guess, as what I think of as camp tends to be.
It's an older version, but it's like this is a lighter movie. It's a lighter movie and less serious movie, I think, than the original Frankenstein. And like I mean, I think we're gonna get to this scene later, but there's a part where like where the monster is smoking a cigar and he goes, "Smoke good."
Yes.
It's like hilarious.
It is very funny and very silly. It's true. There's a bunch of kind of weird like retconning of the first movie, or like recasting of a lot of actors. Like the dad of the girl who gets drowned in the first movie is named Ludwig in that one, and is renamed Hans in this movie and played by a different actor who is just playing a different character, basically. Like, no, doesn't look the same, not playing a similar personality type or anything. and he like almost immediately gets murdered by the monster and he falls into a wet cave. Thankfully, there was a wet cave beneath the burning windmill, so the monster was able to escape. And someone yells, "It's alive!" because they were like, "We know the line that you liked from the first one."
Back.
It's very like Terminator 2, "I'll be back," kind of like that thing you liked from the first movie. It's back.
Very sequel, this movie.
It is very sequel. Yeah, it's true. Also, Elizabeth Frankenstein is recast. She was played by Mae Clarke in the 31 movie and is played by Valerie Hobson in this movie. One of the things that struck me about this movie right away, like in the first couple scenes, is the production design of it is gobsmackingly gorgeous.
Yeah. More adventurous camera as well.
Yeah. Lots of like dolly moves, a lot more kind of like camera movement, and just like really great lighting and sort of like set design stuff. Like really leaning into the really heightened like gothic stuff. There was definitely a fair bit of that in the 31 Frankenstein movie also, but
yeah,
it feels like it's kind of kicked up a notch here.
The sound movies looked like shittier back then.
Right, yeah.
And I think they have in the years since figured out how to make the sound movies start looking as good as a silent movie.
Yeah, there's this movie kind of, it feels like it has some of that kind of like silent grandeur that was missing in a lot of the early talkies. Pretty early on, we're introduced to a new character, Dr. Pretorius, which is a hell of a name.
Yeah.
Who is Dr. Frankenstein's old professor, mentor.
Yeah. Who kind of like got him inspired to start in the dark arts of
and I feel like
bodies.
Pretty quickly the movie's establishing like, you thought Frankenstein was crazy, check out this guy, he's even crazier.
Well, right, like I thought it was interesting how this movie starts with Frankenstein just being like, at the end of the original Frankenstein movie, he realizes, I have done something bad. This was not good.
Right.
I should not do this anymore.
He has this sort of redemption arc.
And the movie keeps that, right? Where he resists the call to action. Because Dr. Pretorius comes in, he's like, "Hey, you made a monster. Let's make another monster together."
Yeah.
And he spends a lot of time resisting Dr. Pretorius for all of the reasons that you have seen in the first movie until he's like kind of threatened into it.
I think there was a really interesting thing in that where it's like he's resisting it and he's saying like, no, I can't, like that's bad, no more monsters. But you can kind of see behind his eyes, he's like, I do really love making monsters so much though. Like you can see how tempting it is. He's like, I love science. When Dr. Pretorius reveals his menagerie of Lilliputian people, his like miniature people that he's grown from eggs in little glass jars.
Oh no, he said he grew them from seed.
I mean, I took that as, he like had a little petri dish with like, genetic material in it and grew them.
Yeah, like this. Yes, think about it.
There's a lot of talk about seed in this movie for sure.
This movie, he was like,
I don't think that it's unintentional.
I don't think so either. Like it's very ridiculous. Like he's saying like you made your monster out of bodies that already existed, and I grew mine from seed. And I'm like, ew.
I mean, that's how all people get made.
I guess that's true. Yes.
But Dr. Pretorius can't seem to get past the 3-inch margin. All his people are like the size of action figures for some reason. And he's like, I haven't cracked it. I can't make them big yet.
Yeah, and they have little high-pitched voices, and they're little scamps inside of their glass jars.
This scene is like one of the most amazing visual effects scenes of any movie up until this point. Like, it is so good.
This is the same VFX guy from Invisible Man. Yeah, it looks really good. It's a combination of rotoscoping and like black velvet background, quote unquote green screen and double exposure.
Right, but it's like it's so well done. Like there's nary a matte line to be seen. There's like reflections on the table of the glass jar, but then there's
Yeah.
also reflections on the glass jar in front of the people in them. So it's
You-
like they've
Yeah, you
been
can see Dr. Pretorius like morphing like through the back of the glass
yeah.
that
So
the
it's
same people are in. They used a combination of full-size jars to keep the full-size actors in, and then mixed them with the tiny jars on the set.
the best visual effects are always a combination of like multiple things between every shot, so you can't quite pin down how they're doing it. I think. I don't know if you watch the Corridor Crew YouTube channel.
Yeah, occasionally. They just uploaded Steamboat Willie unedited.
Oh, really? Of course. As a bit, I assume. But they talked about this scene on one of their videos, and they're always the people who are like going in like into a pixel. I'm like, oh, that pixel's like the wrong shade of green. Like I know how this was done. And this, they're like, who knows? Like, it's so
Wow,
because it's
I need to
all
watch
also
that.
because it's all like optical effects. You know, it's like
Yeah.
if once you know After Effects and like Blender and things, like once you understand how like computer generated effects work, I think it's kind of easier to find the seams in those. Whereas optical things are usually it's like such a weird combination of like we used a mirror here and then this is forced perspective and then that's a matte and that's a multiple exposure and we combined them all together. But there's so little here that is like, oh, I see where that's like that, like a different camera plate that they like cut out. It's all very seamless and very polished.
There are a couple parts where you can see like slightly rough rotoscoping around the little people, but for the most part, it looks really good.
Yeah, like if this movie was released in like 1965, I would still be like, that's good effects.
Yeah.
He mixes little people and talks about ushering in a new age of gods and monsters, which is where the line comes from. That's what Russell Crowe says in the Dark Universe Mummy movie.
Oh man.
Which I don't understand why they didn't make Van Helsing the like Nick Fury character in that. We don't need to talk about the 2015 Mummy movie for that long.
Again.
I'm gonna keep bringing it up.
The Dark Universe is a very good punchline.
It is. Also, I find that movie kind of fascinating for how terrible it is. But so Dr. Pretorius's sort of mad scheme is that he wants to create like a whole race of like man-made people. Dr. Frankenstein is not. He's like, I think that's probably a bad idea.
See Exhibit A.
Yeah. And Dr. Pretorius is like, you made a man. I think we should make a woman and then see what happens. And I'm like, Pretorius is kind of a perv, huh? But so there's that plot that's happening of like Pretorius and Frankenstein are sort of having their like philosophical debates over the nature of science and creation. Meanwhile, the creature who
Frankenstein the monster.
Yeah, is on the run, and there's a scene from the book where he saves a drowning woman who fell into a lake and then immediately gets shot because someone sees him and it's like a monster. They catch the monster and he gets chained up in a dungeon and then like immediately breaks out. Like they close the door and he like smashes out of the door. And looking for a place to hide, he runs into a little shack where he meets a blind man who, being blind, doesn't see that he is like a creature. And this is kind of like one of the big set pieces of this movie, and like a huge part of the book is the creature like learning to speak and like learning some of his humanity from like in the book. It's like a whole family that he is like spying on for months and months and months and like learning to speak from, and then eventually he talks to just the dad who's blind. They make it just a blind hermit who lives alone, and he's like, I don't have any friends, like come on in, like sure, sit by the fire, have a cigar.
Yeah, and like it's this kind of, the blind man feels ostracized for his for his disability, and he kind of surmises that the monster is mute, and so he's trying to like build communication and trust between the two of them, because this like very innocent guy is not judging our monster like everyone else does.
This is like the first character to treat the monster with any modicum of like respect or humanity, of like like, come sit, have food.
Yeah.
And it is fairly, like, it tugs the heartstrings a little bit of just, like, how reluctant the monster is to be, like, he's, like, ready to smash this guy. And it's like, oh, like, I can sit? And then he learns to say, friend? Which
Friend.
feels like such a, one of those things where I'm like, that's such a, like, pop culture punchline almost, of, like, someone going, friend? And I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure that's, like, this movie is the origin of that.
Right. And he soon, as we talked about earlier, he soon learns a couple other words, which
Yeah.
are smoke, drink,
Good.
good. Yeah, he offers him like whiskey or whatever. He's like, I like whiskey.
Yeah. I think Boris Karloff is very good in these scenes of playing the kind of the more lighthearted scenes in this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of a victim of, like, it's been parodied so much in, like, Young Frankenstein and cartoons and things, that, like, having a guy who looks like Boris Karloff Frankenstein monster smoking a cigar and saying, like, smoke good in that voice is like, it can't not be silly. Like, you can't,
I think it always was. It must have been.
I think it always was, but I think it's additionally extra silly now because we've had so many decades of, like, pop culture riffs on it.
Like in the original Frankenstein, he is scary, and in this, he's a cutie patootie. He's just like, he's just going around being a nice, cute boy.
He kills more people in this movie than in the first one, though.
But it's not unjustified, right?
Well, this is another thing.
It's all in retaliation.
I think this movie is using the book as a good reference point. Is that in the book, the creature is both very sympathetic and is very tragic, and it is also terrifying because it's like, initially it's like, oh, it's everyone disowns, everyone treats him like a monster because they're afraid of him and how he looks. And then basically what happens in this movie plays out where, like, he makes a single friend and learns to speak, and then other people show up and also immediately reject him, and that one sort of, like, tether to humanity is severed, and then he kind of goes off the deep end. And in the book, he becomes a, like, supervillain mastermind who is, like, framing Frankenstein for murder and things like that. In this, he kind of is more of a kind of lumbering, grunting sort of, like, fire bad. He does say that also. He doesn't ever get to speak, like, full sentences like he does in the book. I like how this movie is trying to both make him, like, sweeter and nicer in some scenes, and also kind of more threatening and scarier in others.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is. They maybe lean a bit more into the funny stuff, and so he gets chased away from the old hermit's house by some hunters, and goes to hide in a crypt, where coincidentally Dr. Pretorius is having a picnic, because he's looking for more sort of corpses for Dr. Frankenstein to experiment on.
And then he's like, "Oh, it's you. Welcome."
But before, he's, like, there with his goons, right? And he's like, "Yeah, like, dig up these bodies, take them away." And then, like, "Are you coming also, sir?" And, like, "No, I'm gonna stay down here and have a sandwich and, like, light some candles."
I like to chill in a crypt.
And yeah, he's, like, having a full on, like, picnic with a bunch of bones, and then he sees the creature and it's like, "You want a cigar? You want some wine?" And so then Pretorius is able to sell the creature on the idea of, like, making a bride for him, which is another thing from the book. I don't want to keep hashing on that, but that is also, like, it's a pretty small section in the book where it's like the creature is like, "Make me a woman." In this, it's they give that idea to Pretorius. Pretorius is a good sort of, like, external villain that they're able to kind of put all of the. He probably drives the plot more than any other character in this, but it's like,
Yeah.
He's the one who kind of comes up with all the bad ideas. He's like he's the only character in this that is a, like, straight up, like, overt villain kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he gets the creature to kidnap Elizabeth Frankenstein, and thus forcing the doctor's hand. I like the scene where Praetorius and the creature both confront Dr. Frankenstein, and there's a bit of kind of like, I don't know, there's that tension of like, oh no, this guy's back. I don't want to talk to him. And then it's like, oh, he can talk now. And so then the whole like back third of this movie almost is like going back to the old castle lab, like going to the old set, like turn on all the old electrical equipment,
blow off the dust, and
yeah,
make a lady this time.
This section is very cool because there is a bit of that like sequel thing of like, oh, it's the set from the first movie. Oh, cool. But then they're doing all like weird,
and they're like, the band's back together.
Yeah,
like, we're like Dr. Frankenstein is kind of getting into it again.
Right. This is when he's actually, you know, cooking. Right. It's like you can see the excitement in his eyes of like he loves doing mad science. So he's in his element.
I missed this.
Yeah. And then Dwight Fry is in this again as a different like weirdo guy. Right? He plays Fritz the assistant in the first one, and in this he plays Carl, who's just like a different henchman guy. Like he's Pretorius's henchman, not Frankenstein's henchman. But I thought it was funny that like they cast the same actor of just like, and I was like, wait, is that Fritz or is that a different guy? Different guy.
He's good at it. He's good at being a henchman.
Yeah. There's like even more like weird electrical Tesla coil equipment in this, and like things that spark.
Yeah.
Lots of Dutch angles, which is fun. There's a whole section of like doing science experiments where they're using a heartbeat. They're like getting a heart to beat with electrical current, and that's kind of acting as the score to the scene.
That was
which I thought was very cool. And that's like feels very I don't know, kind of ahead of its time to me, of like using kind of a diegetic sound effect kind of as score for the scene.
And I think notable is that maybe this is a kind of post-code concession, was that they don't actually show the heart, right? They kind of talk about it, and it's just off frame.
Yeah.
Because like, I don't know if it seems like they felt like they would have a hard time getting away with showing like a beating human heart in on a film.
Yeah.
In 35.
But so they make they use the corpses of recently deceased people, and by that I mean someone that Carl murders. They send Carl out to murder a woman to use the body of. But they grow the brain from scratch. That's like Pretorius grows the brain. He handles that side of things. I guess he can grow a full-size brain. He's figured that much out. And then they make a bride. They make a woman Frankenstein creature with the big hair.
The iconic,
right, and that's
shock of hair.
Yeah, and then the movie ends like 2 minutes later.
Yeah,
like, I was
surprised. How little Bride of Frankenstein.
I had probably seen almost her entire screen time in just like clips from this movie that I'd already seen. Like,
yeah,
she is in this movie shockingly small amount of time. It's like, so they bring the bride to life, and then male monster is like, woman, for me, friend. And she screams and is upset. And he's like, she hate me, I ugly, no. And so then he blows up the lab with the bride and with Praetorius in it after saying, we belong dead. Which is a good line. Like, that is a great... There's also a line he has earlier when he's in the crypt where he's like, he says something about it's like he preferred being dead, like being alive is pain and agony constantly. And I was like, that's heavy. Like, that's... Yeah. I think Boris Karloff is very good in those moments where he's like really kind of showing pathos. And
he lets Frankenstein go. He kind of
like,
realizes...
You live.
He realizes that, like, you know, Frankenstein's
you
trying
stay,
to do the
I
right
go,
thing.
no following.
Yes.
And then it's right. The lab blows up, and Henry and Elizabeth Frankenstein get out, and then it's like hard cut to credits. Like, there is no... I feel like old movies do this a lot, where it's like, nope, that's the end. There is zero like epilogue or sort of like falling action.
I like that, honestly. Like there are a lot of modern movies where I'm like, okay, story's over. And
I mean, also, this movie is like 75 minutes long. This movie is like very brisk. It gets in, it does its thing, it gets out. I do like that about it.
I saw this at Alamo, and I was getting my check before I even saw the bride, and I was like, oh, this movie's short.
Yeah, it is pretty nuts how little bride there is in this movie, because it is such an iconic image, right? Like, the Jack Pierce did the makeup again for this movie and designed the whole thing. Apparently the hair, the iconic hair, is based on Nefertiti, like an Egyptian like hair / like headdress shape, which, looking at it, makes sense, but I wouldn't have thought of. I see it as just like, oh yeah, it's the Bride of Frankenstein hair.
Right.
It's got the lightning bolts on it. It's a beehive.
She's got a big kind of like xenomorph kind of thing going on.
Well,
with
it's more
with the shock of white hair going through it.
It's less of a beehive than I thought it was. I feel like it's in parodies it's usually more of a beehive shape, and this it is more of a kind of like Egyptian, like, it's more cylindrical, I guess, if that makes sense. Also, Lancaster doesn't get a lot to do, really. She gets like one very short scene where she like comes to life and then screams and then gets exploded.
Yeah. As we all do, right?
Yeah. What else is there to life?
Become alive, scream, explode.
I forget who wrote it, but one of my favorite Letterboxd reviews of, I checked the Letterboxd reviews of this after I watched it. One of them is, this is about a lesbian and a gay man who get set up on a blind date and hate each other.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing, but I like that read of this movie.
Gay Frankenstein confirmed.
I don't necessarily know if this movie has a huge clear thesis other than just like, don't make Frankenstein monsters. Like, don't do it. You did it once, it was a bad idea. Don't do it a second time.
Right.
Either.
Yeah. It's fun. This movie is fun. But
I think especially Dr. Frankenstein, Henry Frankenstein, as his name is in the movie, and Boris Karloff are both, they're like character stuff I thought was very good in this movie. It was like, it felt like a natural progression of what they did in the first one. It didn't feel forced, and it felt like they were enriching the characters that they had played already by having more things happen to them.
True. Yeah.
I feel like this movie has a long like cultural shadow. I don't know, there's lots of things that I had previously associated with like Frankenstein stuff I didn't realize came from this movie and not some other things. So
right. Yeah. Like him talking in broken English and
right. Yeah, because like he doesn't do any of that in the first one. I thought that was almost like sort of like the way that Igor like doesn't exist. Like he's either Fritz the hunchback or he's Igor the other guy who isn't a hunchback.
Yeah.
I thought the sort of like the Frankenstein speech thing was more of that kind of like weird mishmash of like different things. But no, it's just like verbatim from this movie.
Speaking of another silly movie.
Okay, let's go. We'll do some comedy.
You want to hop over to the comedy world?
Sure. Well, let's talk about Top Hat.
Okay. All right.
Because in Young Frankenstein,
the lesser silly.
In Young Frankenstein, they do a lot of top hat dancing, and so that's a good transition.
Wow.
But Top Hat is a Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers dance joint.
Yeah.
Famous duo. I'd never seen any of their movies. I mean, I'd seen Ginger Rogers is in Gold Diggers of 1933, but that was it.
Yeah, this is already their fourth movie together, and they did not a third or fourth movie, and they did 9 together.
I think it's their third. I think they did Flying Down to Rio, which they're like not top billed in, and then they're also in The Gay Divorcee, which is the same director and a lot of the same cast, and that was like marketed as a like Astaire Rogers picture. And
their chemistry's great, so I understand why they're doing that.
Makes sense. Any scene where like they're together is very good. I feel like both the sort of like larger dance set pieces and a lot of the like comic plot hijinks stuff, I feel like I liked more in Gold Diggers and like the Ernst Lubitsch movies that we've watched. I think this has a lot in common with those types of movies. There's a lot of like comedy of manners and like mistaken identity, and there's like clear sort of 30s comedy bits that they like to do.
This is another entry in what I'm realizing is my favorite 30s genre, which is people who are in love fuck with each other.
Yeah.
They're just messing with each other the entire time, and they don't realize that they love each other, or I don't know. There's like a lot of this, like you were saying, mistaken identity, or like or incorrect assumptions about things, and so they're just playfully mean to each other. And I love these 30s comedies where people are playfully mean to each other.
Yeah.
Like It Happened One Night and Designed for Living and
Thin Man,
Gold Diggers, Thin Man.
Yeah.
Like it's great. I love it. It's so funny.
Mean 30s comedies are a great thing.
So this this isn't, I think Designed for Living is probably my favorite of this type, but I really enjoyed it in this movie. I thought it was really good.
I feel like kind of the last couple that we watched, like I probably like this less than Designed for Living, Thin Man, or Gold Diggers or 33, but it's still a very fun movie. And it still has some like really amazing dance stuff in it, and some kind of just like classic rom-com hijinks.
Yeah.
Like being mad at somebody and like as soon as they leave the room they smile like ooh. There's also like a lot of kind of like returning like character actors. There's Edward Everett Horton is in this movie, who is also in Design for Living, and I feel like at least one other movie that we watched, right?
Playing it, I think it might have just been Designed for Living. I was looking at his filmography a bit, but he was playing a similar character of just kind of fuddy-duddy.
He plays like a rich, like stuck-up dude who kind of sucks in it.
Yeah,
and he's very good at it. He's kind of the male Margaret Dumont a little bit. Like they both play like very like upper crust, like, oh my, how could you, like,
he has a little
what
more
is the meaning of this?
A little more dimensionality than that,
I think so, especially in this movie. In this movie his character's a lot more likable than in Design for Living. In Design for Living, it's like is very much like, oh fuck this guy. I did out loud, I said this fucker when he appeared on screen, so which is said only with love. I love Edward Everett Horton in stuff. I think I like the lane that he's found for himself in 30s comedies is very good. Speaking of Alamo Drafthouse, they often use the beginning of this movie as part of their don't talk pre-roll thing.
Oh, that's where I've seen this before.
Yeah. So the opening of this movie is Fred Astaire is in the Thackeray Club of London, where there's a big sign that says silence. You can't make any noise. And there's a bunch of old English gentlemen in tuxedos who are like, if you like hit a glass against a plate, it'll make too much a noise. And everyone goes, shh. And so Fred Astaire is trying to like fold a newspaper very quietly. But then at the end of the scene, when he's leaving, he does the little tap dancing and freaks everybody out.
This that has been an Alamo don't talk message for a long time. One of their more like family friendly ones. And the fact that like
the giant kid that comes out of the
well, that's the thing, right? Is that Alamo don't talk messages used to be a lot edgier, meaner. and meaner. And they, as they have gotten more corporate, they're like, okay, we can do the family friendly top hat clip.
I think
we
top hat
we
clip
can't
is very
anymore.
fun.
It's good, but it's like, oh, we can't do the we can't do the there's a sniper in the projection booth and he's going to explode you with his bullet anymore.
I don't remember ever seeing that one, but
speaking of the tap dancing, it's a lot of fun in this movie. And it made me want to start trying to tap dance because I just want to I want to immerse myself in the 30s. And
here's the thing. Watching this movie absolutely made me want to like be good at dancing. which I don't know if I'm like physically capable of. I'm sure if I like really dedicated the time to it, but I don't have a very natural talent or like sense of rhythm.
Let's try and learn to tap dance together. I think that would be fun.
That would be fun. But watching this movie and movies like this, I'm like, "Ugh, people who are good at dancing look like they're having a grand old time, and I'm jealous."
Yeah. It seems like a nice way of sort of like, because it's a sort of minimal form of dancing where the point is more the sound you're making, and you're just kind of like, it's almost like an amplified version of just like tapping your hands on the table along to a beat, you know?
Yeah.
But you're kind of amplifying the sound that's already there with the tapping. When I was watching this movie and ideating about buying tap shoes, I walked over to my partner after the movie was over, and I was like, I have found a new way to make a racket.
Well, very apt for this movie, because the two romantic leads would never possibly have met if he wasn't making a racket with his tap dancing.
This was some more like really charming stuff in the beginning of this movie, where Edward Everett Horton's character, Mr. Hardwick, tells Fred Astaire, you should settle down and get a wife. And then he sings a whole song about how he's glad to be free and not have a wife. And the song ends with him, he's like, who's that? She, future wife material.
Also, Mr. Hardwick is saying, like, you need to like settle down. And meanwhile, he's like, there's a woman downstairs and she wants to see me. Hello. And it was like putting on his hat, which is a kind of a recurring joke throughout the movie, is that Mr. Hardwick is like married, but kind of remains a ladies' man a little bit.
While he's singing his I don't want a wife song, he's tap dancing. and then the camera just goes down through the floor in one of those
great shot.
Classic like shots of kind of moving from one floor to the other and showing like the in-between part. And then it's just Ginger Rogers looking up like, is this guy seriously tap dancing above me? Like classic upstairs neighbor.
Yeah. Classic
like
if you've
situation.
ever lived in any apartment in New York City situation. I thankfully have never lived below a tap dancer, but
you have people below you, right?
I do, but I don't tap dance.
You will soon.
Maybe. I don't think I would do it. I'd probably have to like go to a dance gym. They have those, right? A studio.
Yeah, it's where you lift weights with your feet.
One thing that I like about the opening scene in the silent club is that it's like a funny bit where he's trying to be quiet and like fold his newspaper, but it immediately establishes that Fred Astaire's character, Jerry Travers, he's a little stinker. He's
a scamp.
Yeah, he's a scamp. He's a bit of a troublemaker. He's like he's got a sense of humor, and he's willing to mess with people, which will come back. There's another character that gets introduced early on, Bates, who is Mr. Hardwick's butler. Valet, I think is what they call him. And
his all-purpose fixer in this movie.
And Bates refers to himself/themselves in the plural, but it's very inconsistent. He's sort of like Venom. Like we have your shoes for you, sir. But it's inconsistent because initially it was like, oh, they're like really sticking to this, and they're even other characters are only referring to him with like plural pronouns. But then it's like even Bates is not consistent with it. Like within a sentence, he will refer to himself as I, or
I guess it's probably just going for like like almost like a royal sort of fanciness, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Bates is like almost feels like a kind of a grab bag of like character quirks.
Yeah.
Because it's like at times he's like
sassy at times.
He's very sassy. At times he seems like kind of like bumbling and ineffectual, and other times he is like shockingly competent. He reminded me a lot of, spoilers for the end of the movie, I guess, but he reminded me a lot of Gene Parmesan from Arrested Development, because towards the end of the movie he starts disguising himself as different people. So
yeah, but he's fancy and British, and he says stuff like whither or thither, sir.
Yeah. And so Ginger Rogers runs upstairs. They have a sort of tete-a-tete. She goes back downstairs and he dances the dance of sleep, which is like a very quiet tap dance.
Yeah, he spreads some sand on the ground.
Yeah.
To make a almost like a drum, like a brush on a drum. It's like a very chiller tap dance.
But then they have a nice. He kind of like not quite kidnaps her, but he like pretends to be the London cabbie on a horse-drawn carriage, and goes to the park where she is doing equestrian stuff at the park. A lot of horse jokes thrown in here.
Yes, like the one that I had to write down because I loved it so was she. You probably know what I'm going for. Is she says, "What is this strange power you have over horses?" And he says, "Horsepower."
Good joke.
Good joke.
But then it starts raining, and so they have to go to if you're in the park and it starts to rain, where do you go?
Gazebo, baby.
The gazebo. And so they have a nice little dance at the gazebo, and it is around this point in the movie where it's like every movie should have a dance scene in it. I feel like even if it's like very brief, even if it's just like two people just like doing a little boogie for like 3 seconds, you get some dancing in every movie because I think it can only enrich something.
This is where this scene is where they kind of go from like, there's that annoying guy that lives above me to like actually falling in love. And it's where like the movie, I think really just kind of takes off and like the emotional stakes of the movie begin.
Right. Cause this is like, okay, clearly these two people have great chemistry with each other. They both like each other a lot. They're dancing in the park in the rain. It's very romantic. It can only get better from here, which is of course the perfect time for a movie to throw a wrench in the works. So the whole sort of like main kind of plot of this movie was genuinely kind of confusing. There's a lot of like misjudgment and mistaken identity and lies, and because like so
the main thing is that she gets the impression that he is Mr. Hardwick and who is married
to a friend of hers,
right? And so she's like, how could you? And she slaps him or punches him right when he thinks that they've just fallen in love.
Big ol' slap in the face. She is sort of staying in London with a this very silly Italian costume designer named Bedini. And as soon as he showed up, I was like, Chico Marx is in this movie?
doing broad Italian
stereotypical accents was just a big thing in the 30s. They've seemingly like broken apart. Like this relationship is done. There is a good bit where Jerry, Fred Astaire's character, is talking to Hardwick about it
on The Nerdist.
Right. Hardwick goes to the valet, Bates, yeah. He has a problem, and he goes, "Well, have you tried rubbing butter on it, sir?" He goes, "You can't rub a girl with butter." And he goes, "My sister got." Well, that's what he said. He goes like, "Oh, he's stepped in a hornet's nest."
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, "My sister got into a hornet's nest, and we rubbed her with butter." It's a great bit. There's a lot of jokes in this movie, also with both Bates and also Bedini. Like Bedini is a lot of things like he doesn't understand like English figures of speech. He uses a lot of like malapropisms and like doesn't understand like wordplay.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bates seemingly takes everything very literally.
A lot of good like just good witty 30s comedy in this movie, and it would be kind of ridiculous to break down all of the plot because
it's too much. Because at this
just
point,
a lot of machinations of
yeah,
it kind of just springs off from that mistaken identity, and it takes them the entire movie to solve it. And there's just like a lot of convoluted things that make it more difficult for them to.
Yeah, there's a lot of like jokes involving objects that are covering someone's face, and so the person seeing them thinks it's someone else.
Yeah.
There's like, oh, this person walked behind like a chandelier, and so you can't see who it is, and so they switched places, and then or like this person thinks they're dancing with one person, they're actually dancing with a different person, which are very fun. There is a section where Dale, Ginger Rogers' character, kind of thinks that like the Hardwick couple are swingers because Madge knows that she's not married to Fred Astaire. And so when they're interacting, she's like, "No, like go hang out with her. Like, yeah, you two kids go crazy." And so then like they're dancing together, and Madge, who's Mrs. Hardwick, keeps like winking at Ginger Rogers.
She's like, "What the hell are you doing?"
Yeah, and it's like, "I thought I was dancing with your husband. Like, what is happening?"
She thought that it was swing time. For the listening audience, and I guess anyone, because we might not be on screen right now, I just held up my laser disc of Swing Time, which we'll be watching for next week.
Right, with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire.
Yes.
Right. This whole section of the movie takes place in Venice, which is not shot in Venice. It is shot on a massive soundstage set that looks like The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, I was looking at this and I was like, "This is like, did you go to Disneyland to shoot
Yes.
this?" Because like, yeah, very clean.
It is
blocky.
absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. It is the Disneyland version of Venice.
Yeah.
It is like the most obvious film set ever built. But I kind of like that about it. It's very theatrical, but in kind of a fun, goofy way.
Yeah, and speaking of theatrical, Hardwick and Jerry are putting on a kind of dance review, as everybody is doing in every movie.
Yeah.
They're all putting on Broadway shows, and it gives us an opportunity for another kind of showstopper tap dance performance and singing performance from Fred Astaire.
The titular song, Top Hat. Put on your top
Right.
hat.
Yes. Which, a lot of good tap dancing in it. I think during this one was when I decided that I wanted to start tap dancing. And the greatest part of it, though, is where he has like a row of other guys in tuxes tap dancing behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes his cane and holds it up like it's a rifle, and then uses his tap shoes to go and make it sound like he was shooting one of them. So he's pretending to shoot all of these backup dancers with his cane, and they fall down one at a time. And then there's a point where he does a and then like moves it around like it's a Tommy gun, which is a great way of showing a Tommy gun when you are not allowed to.
Right, because at this point, that's one
code.
of the production code things that you're not allowed to show. Should we talk about the like production code don'ts on this episode?
Yeah, I think we should.
I don't know if this is the spot to do it, but
while you look up that list, I'll just finish describing the scene. So like, it's fantastic. It's like, it's a really kind of weird use of tap and dancing, but it is one of the kind of dips into fantasy slightly of the. I mean, it all takes place diegetically, but it's like heightened in a way. This sequence, unlike something like Gold Diggers, this doesn't have any kind of all the dancing in and singing in this movie sort of like makes sense in the world, and it's only like slightly heightened. We're not going to like another reality like we are in some other musicals to do our dancing scenes.
I feel like this movie kind of goes back and forth almost. Like it is, most of the dancing in it is diegetic, but it almost like as a dance scene goes on, it almost kind of shifts into a more dreamlike reality, and then kind of comes back to the kind of more naturalistic reality of the rest of the movie.
But like only slightly, because it's the same sets that they're in.
Yeah,
before.
But like everyone else disappears. Like everyone else in the room kind of goes away, and they kind of enter into this like little world all of their own. And then once the dancing is over, they kind of return, which is a cool way of doing it, I think.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, is there much else to say about this movie? Should we just wrap it up and then talk about the production code?
Cheek to Cheek is a good song that I had heard before. I had also heard the Top Hat song. Those are kind of the two songs in this that are probably the most famous, and I had definitely heard before many times. Yeah, I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff where Bedini is like so quick to like murder someone for Ginger
Pulling
Rogers.
out his fencing sword.
He has a sword, and it's like she's talking to him about, it's like, oh, I've got this problem with this guy, and he's like, I will murder him for you, and she's like, please don't.
There's kind of an all is lost moment where Dale gets married to Bellini, and we're like, oh no, what's gonna happen? Like this isn't like it happened one night where she walks away right at the end, you know, like she actually got married to him. How are we gonna get out of this pickle? And then we find out that our Gene Parmesan globe-trotting master of disguise butler actually pretended to be a priest and did not truly marry the two of them, and now they can all be happily ever after.
Yep. Fun movie. I enjoyed it. Before we get to our next movie, let's brief interlude about the Hays Code, because I want to bring up this photo especially, which is from 1940. So we're jumping the gun a little bit, I guess. But 1935 is the first year of like fully enforced Hollywood Hays Code stuff, right? Where Breen was kind of the guy who was like watching all the movies and like giving everyone notes and like being a real hard ass about it.
Yeah. It's always called the Hays Code, and Hays had been involved since the early mid-20s, but he was more of like a lobbyist for the film industry and didn't actually care that much about censoring it. Where this guy was Joseph Breen, I think.
I believe so. He was part of the like what it was like the Catholic League or something. Right.
He was brought on, and once he was brought on, he kind of put the hammer down and started like actually enforcing the production code.
The League of Decency, is that what it was called? It's something like that.
Yeah. The League of Won't Someone Please Think of the Children.
But so in 1940, someone made a photograph sort of mocking the Hays Code rules, and that the Hays Code was broken down into certain like sections. There's like the don'ts, the like sometimes don'ts. I forget like how they
be carefuls.
Right. And so there's things like that you could kind of get away with in Hays Code movies, and there were some things like you could not show. They leave some stuff off of here that is like in tons of movies and TV now, but I assume that was also not allowed. But in 1940, someone made this photo where they tried to put as much of the thou shalt nots into the photo as possible, and it just leads to this super kick-ass awesome picture. Forbidden under the Hays Code are law defeated. You couldn't show like the law, like police losing, inside of a woman's thigh or male thigh. They don't specify. Lace lingerie, a dead man, narcotics, drinking, an exposed bosom, gambling, pointing a gun, and then just a Tommy gun, which is very specific. They're like singling out a specific like brand of gun that you can't show. But I guess it was sort of like such a ubiquitous and kind of like romanticized. Tommy guns are a very kind of iconic, like distinctive looking object. So
yeah,
I guess there was some precedent for that. But so this picture has all of these things in it, and it's just a scantily clad woman standing over a dead cop with a gun and an empty glass, and there's like a bottle behind her. We'll throw it up.
Smoking a cigarette.
Let's throw it up in the video. Like... I think this picture rules.
It goes hard.
Yeah, I wanted to bring it up. Also, look, what an arbitrary list of things not to put in a movie, and like very focused on like crime and like how crime is presented. I think.
Yeah.
That seems like a big sticking point for the Hays Code of like you can't show the law in a bad light, kind of. Pre-code gangster movies got in while the getting was good, and we haven't yet watched any gangster movies from the post-code, but I think they're gonna, I'm guessing, shift away from that style of movie and get into something a little bit more. The movies that I'm thinking of that are like crime movies that are Hays Code are more like 1940s. So
yeah, although on my gangsters box set that I was working off of for Little Caesar and Public Enemy, the next one coming up was The Petrified Forest, which is 1936, starring Humphrey Bogart.
Hey,
so
we haven't talked about him yet.
Maybe we could watch that one next week.
Sounds good to me. But before we get to The Petrified Forests, let's talk about another comedy involving top hats.
A link between both of these movies is this using a conductor's stick as part of a scene transition, like a match cut. In both of these movies, we have like somebody tapping on something, and it cuts from that tapping to the tapping of a conductor's stick on their I don't know, music stand or whatever.
I didn't watch these movies back to back, so I did not pick up on that.
Yeah, weird thing that they did in both of these movies. Like both times I was like, whoa, crazy match cut. And it was like, wait, that's the same match cut?
A Night at the Opera is the movie that we're talking about.
Oh, yes. Correct. Yes, the Night of the Opera. The Night of the Opera.
Night of the Opera would be a great title.
Yet another Marx Brothers.
But notably, the first MGM Marx Brothers movie. They were previously
sans Zeppo.
Yeah, they had previously done all their movies under Paramount, I think, and this was kind of a shift. And I read afterwards on Wikipedia, so take this with a grain of salt, that Irving Thalberg, who was the head of MGM at the time, kind of wanted this movie to be a bit more kind of like cohesive. He kind of wanted to like sand the edges off of like the Marx Brothers thing, like give them more structure and for there to be like characters that you like cared about and like followed through the story.
Yeah.
And how successful that is debatable. How much that changes what this movie feels like, whatever.
Yeah.
The thing that I found very funny about it was the way it was worded on Wikipedia specifically was like, unlike previous Marx Brothers movies, scenes in Night at the Opera have a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's like...
I mean, I did notice when I was watching the movie that it seems like they're trying a little bit harder to make it a story, but also I had the thought watching the movie of Marx Brothers movies are barely movies. They're just a bunch of stuff happening.
They're a bunch of bits, and I almost feel like they might work better with less narrative.
Yeah, I think that this and what's the last one we watched? Duck Soup.
Duck Soup
are like tend to be the ones that people think about the most often, that are like the most famous, most respected. And this one's good. It's well put together, but I think that, you know, the narrative writing is not incredible. And so like
that's the thing.
It lets the jokes take a back seat sometimes.
I think
so Duck Soup is a lot more joke forward, and I think it works better for it.
I think Duck Soup is a lot better than this. I know that I am the Marx Brothers you know, unenjoyer or whatever.
Yeah.
But
I like this movie, but like I was also just kind of like, all right, I'm done, you know.
But I think the intent behind sort of like stripping away some of the jokes and trying to make it more narrative forward was to kind of like make the jokes land better. Right. And I think it kind of has the opposite
making
effect.
them more contextual.
I think that I do approve of, because a lot of Marx Brothers humor is like completely devoid of context, and it's like this joke is just here because it's a joke, and this movie at least tries to kind of put a little bit more context around stuff, and also to kind of make all of the characters a little bit less anarchic, I think, too, a little bit.
Take the anarchy away from Marx Brothers.
But that is like, it does feel like they're trying to make them nicer in this one. Like, particularly Chico and Harpo aren't like assaulting people in this as much. Like there's less sort of like outright kind of like antagonistic stuff happening outside of like a few characters.
So I mean, this is their first MGM movie. This is their first movie without Zeppo, and this is also their first post Hays Code movie.
True.
And
also good point.
This is this movie feels a bit more squeaky clean.
It feels
Duck
a bit
Soup
more
their
like
movies.
It's like, it feels like they're going for more of a like family friendly vibe,
like kid friendly even. Like there's a part in this movie which they didn't do in Duck Soup, thankfully, but it harkens back to their earlier ones. The whole movie just grinds to a halt while we watch them play harp.
But at least this, it isn't like, it's like, oh, they're on a ship that has a band. They like go and play the instruments that are already there. There's a little bit of justification for it, as opposed to in was it Animal Crackers, when it's just like hard cut, now like 4 minutes of Harpo playing the harp, and then hard cut, the movie continues.
I mean, this still did that, but yeah, it had like a bit of a narrative context. But I thought, crucially, during those scenes, it was the two of them acting like clowns and entertaining a bunch of children.
Yeah.
It was all kids in the background of those scenes. And so it was them being silly on instruments and then the kids going
I did write Harpo has very big like magician / clown at a birthday party energy in this movie.
Yeah.
Especially in that scene where like he's like playing music and doing his Harpo bits to a bunch of laughing children, and it's like, oh yeah, he's performing at a birthday party. That's what
right.
this is.
And to me it felt like this is like the movie carving out who its audience is, right? Like you're seeing yourself on screen because you are a kid laughing at the silly man, you know?
Yeah. And maybe that's part of why like I don't feel a like strong I don't really enjoy Marx Brothers movies that much. It's like I didn't watch them as a kid. I've started watching Marx Brothers in my 30s, and I'm kind of like, I don't know. I don't know about these. I don't know about these fellas. Which is like, I like Duck Soup for sure. Like Duck Soup, I think is a fun, entertaining movie that I laughed at a bunch. But I think especially in comparison to a lot of the other 30s comedies that we're watching, I'm just like, I don't know, this sort of like throwing stuff at the wall type of comedy just doesn't. I feel like when it hits, it is very, very funny, but the amount of jokes that don't land, I'm just kind of like, I don't know, the hit rate is very low on these, I feel like.
Yeah, and like some of the slapstick comedy stuff could feel a little random at times, but
random.
I think that I think that it kind of works better in that medium, the kind of out of nowhere nature of it. And now that we have like other 30s comedies to compare them to, like the other comedies that are coming out of the 30s, rather than being this sort of like talking continuation of the silent clown established status quo, we have these other 30s movies that are very dialogue-y, and very like situation comedies.
Yeah.
And I think they work really well, and they work better than the Marx Brothers stuff.
Yeah. I don't even know if this format existed in 1935, but I feel like if the Marx Brothers were doing like sketch comedy, it would be great. Because I feel like that's kind of what Duck Soup feels like.
Yeah,
it feels more like a sketch comedy where it's like there's like a very, very bare bones narrative to it, but it's like just enough to kind of carry you ahead of like, and now a bunch of stuff happens.
And now for something completely different. I mean, the Marx Brothers, right, in their narrative attempts are kind of failing at making Holy Grail when they should be making Meaning of Life, right?
Right, I guess, right? You sure? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Like, I think that Groucho does a lot is he will sort of make asides as if he's speaking to an audience. But it's not to camera. He'll just kind of like lean over his shoulder and be like, "Get a load of this over here."
I mean, sometimes it's to camera, but
rarely.
He's got a lazy eye, so it's hard to tell.
It almost feels like he should be doing like the full Fleabag, where he like stares right down the barrel and he's just like, "Get a load of this." But it's like it's not quite. Again, this is hindsight, but I feel like there are like more contemporary comedy things that are sort of like all bits without a lot of narrative to them. That are like, we're just gonna do sketch comedy stuff, like Portlandia or something. I feel like if Marx Brothers were on Portlandia, they'd kill it.
Right, and some are just Groucho, and the other ones are just Harpo and Chico, right?
Yeah, but I also think like because I feel like the Groucho making asides to an audience feels like a thing that came out of their stage stuff, where he would just like make jokes to the audience.
Yeah,
and I've sort of like, hey, audience, like, check this out. And I feel like if they
breaking the fourth wall is still pretty rare in movies, but it's there is a more visible fourth wall when you're on the stage.
But it's like, I feel like they're not committing to it enough at this point, where it's like, if he's gonna do that, he should be like staring at the camera and like directly addressing a movie audience,
right?
And that, because it's that thing where it's like, it's not quite, it's like stuck between two like mediums almost. We haven't said a thing about what happens in this movie.
As for this movie, it's like the standard thing where they're in an environment full of rich people and they are silly.
There's a couple this one moves. It goes from like an opera house to a boat to an opera house, I guess. It's no longer like a single room almost.
Right. Yeah, it feels higher budget than the other ones.
Mhm.
There's bigger sets, more people. I don't think there's anything wrong with this movie. I like it. It's fun. It's just like another Marx Brothers movie.
I was hoping for more. I think after Duck Soup, I was like, "Ooh, okay, like now they're progressing, like they're getting better." And I feel like this one in some ways does feel like a progression from that one, but often in kind of the wrong direction, in that it's like, let's do less jokes overall and kind of like put more emphasis on like the narrative and like the side characters and like the kind of romantic subplot and that kind of thing. And I'm like, no one watches Marx Brothers movies for that.
Yeah, the role that usually goes to Zeppo, they had to cast they have their formula, right? Where
Right.
like
There is still a Zeppo character in this.
exactly, yeah. There's a Zeppo character who is a pretty boy who does nothing, and that's Ricardo in this movie.
The most boring movie character in anything.
And yeah, he's in love and he sings. There's a part where it stops to listen to him sing. He's pretty good at it. And then he ends up with the lady at the end. The end. That's the story.
But it's like the supporting cast in this movie are both not as funny as the Marx Brothers and also not as good actors as in like the supporting cast of like other than Margaret Dumont, who I think is very good at her shtick in Marx Brothers movies.
Done it a million times now.
Right?
I think that she has less to do in this movie though. Like
yeah.
They don't get to play off of her as much in this one.
There are some very good. There's like the scene where they're all like piling into a tiny cabin on the boat, and there's this like absurd amount of people who are all inside this tiny room, and they're all like climbing over each other. Good bit. There's a where they're in a hotel room and there's a detective who's trying to like arrest them, and they keep moving the beds around while he isn't looking and gaslighting him into thinking that he's going insane.
It's also another one of their bits where there are two rooms and they're going back and forth between them in a zany way.
But it's sort of like there is like a punchline to it. It isn't just them running between two rooms like it was in the Coconuts.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of like trapeze stuff with Harpo at the end where he's like swinging around on ropes. I don't know how much of that. Cool. I don't know how much of that is actually Harpo doing it. But
he's like probably pushing 50 at this point, so maybe not.
But it's very cool, and like all like the trapeze things and like lifting and lowering backdrops on an opera stage. The kind of third act like showcase set piece is very good.
Yeah. They use the the staging well in those late scenes. They have the classic bit of somebody's got to get hit in the head with a sandbag, right?
Oh, of course.
It must happen.
Yeah.
So it does.
It happens pretty early too. They get it out of the way. Like, don't worry, we know we're gonna give you someone getting hit in the head with a sandbag.
I think that they're like, as we've watched the formula of all of these Marx Brothers movies, I think there's a reading of it of like speaking to the feelings of people who are living through the Depression, where
they're just like, show us something silly, please.
Well, no, but they're all set in like high society, right? Like all these movies are about people, about a bunch of people who are engaged in a bunch of fancy person shenanigans who have millions of dollars and they are still flaunting their wealth even during the Depression, right? They're still living as rich people during the Depression, and then the Marx Brothers come in to just ruin their time, right? It's this like cathartic thing for the poor people watching the movie to have the Marx Brothers come in and mess around with rich people and be this kind of annoying presence to all of them.
Yeah. Which I can get behind that for sure. And I do like how that is like so much of their formula is like, look at these snooty assholes. We're just gonna like like drop buckets of water on their heads and steal their shoes. There is a bunch of the stuff on the boat, and it made me think, like, what was boat travel like in 1935? It's played for comedy that there's like a buffet full of like spaghetti and like full chickens that they're giving people.
It was like a cruise ship, basically.
Yeah.
Nowadays, Groucho or Chico and Harpo would be gallivanting amongst the water slides and and Mickey Mouses on a Disney cruise.
Someone make that movie. All right, shall we move on to our action double feature?
Yeah, let's do it.
Speaking of filmmakers that we have talked about previously, Alfred Hitchcock has got a new picture, The 39 Steps.
You're obsessed with these, obsessed to an unhealthy degree with these
unhealthy
segues.
No, I want the conversation to flow nicely.
That's true. Yeah. Okay.
When it works, all of them have been clumsy this episode, but when they work very well.
Maybe that's why I've been feeling it. I'm like, do we need to have a segue if we take like really a minute and a half to build up to that?
The 39 Steps, Alfred Hitchcock, is another kind of like spy thriller, sort of spy adventure movie. Like, ordinary man gets caught up in intrigue.
I like this. I like this one a lot.
Yeah, I'd seen this one before, and I think I remember liking it more than I did this time. I feel like this time I was like, oh yeah, 39 Steps, that movie's great. And I was like, it's pretty good.
I think it's better than The Man Who Knew Too Much. It feels like a more confidently made movie. There are aspects of The Man Who Knew Too Much that feel a little rough around the edges, and this one feels like quite polished as a film. I don't know. I think it worked really well. It's a different kind of story. It doesn't have the kind of like tonal weirdness of The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Yeah.
Where it's like your main character is telling his daughter to buzz off and shut up all the time.
Shut up, you. Yeah, the character in this is kind of more of a kind of a rakish gentleman. He's more of a.
What does that mean?
I don't know, like he's like, I don't know, he's a very typical like action movie protagonist, I feel like, which is like he's an ordinary guy, but he can like he can fight when he needs to, and he like ladies like him, and he drops a few one-liners here and there. He just feels like a very kind of
Bruce Willis type.
Yeah, if Bruce Willis was Canadian and had an English accent and a pencil mustache.
Wait, a pencil mustache? Was that mustache such a pencil that I didn't even notice its existence?
Got a little mustache, didn't he? Nice little 30s mustache.
Oh yeah, he does. That's right. It works for him. I think it works for him so well that I didn't think about it.
I think a thing that I probably like chafed against more rewatching this movie is like the whole man on the run with a woman that he's kidnapped stuff didn't play as charmingly as I remember it being. Like, I feel like the movie like really plays up the fact that she is like does not want to be there and is afraid and is very uncomfortable, and he's like, I'll be fine, don't worry, I might be a murderer, you don't know. And it's like, this is being played very comedically, and I don't like it.
I don't know, like, I guess, you know, I was saying that it was less tonally inconsistent than the other one, but maybe it's just because it worked for me, because like I thought that it's kind of 20-30 minute delving into a romantic comedy kind of like worked pretty well for me.
Maybe it's the fact that I just watched It Happened One Night, which is kind of a similar premise of like man and woman who are like on the run and like dodging the cops kind of, and falling for each other at the same time, and it's like that movie is so charming, and in this it's like it feels so much kind of like meaner, I guess, in a less fun way.
Yeah.
In a more of a Hitchcock way, where he's just like, this is creepy.
I mean, I don't know if I've seen Hitchcock do comedy anywhere else.
No? I mean, I don't know. I feel like he doesn't really make like comedies, but I feel like his like spy movies tend to have this, are tonally more like this. Maybe I'm just thinking of North by Northwest, which is like his sort of magnum opus of the like ordinary man gets involved in spy intrigue movies. Because that movie is like, I don't want to say that movie's perfect, but that movie is like, last couple times I've seen it, I'm just like, no notes, this movie's great. Incredible. Yeah. But also it's like, you got Cary Grant exploding charm across the screen, so it's like, it's hard to go wrong. Nothing against the guy in this movie, who I do think is pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's a fun angle that they are handcuffed together the entire time.
Yeah.
They get some good bits out of that.
The setup is great. Like it's more the like it is maybe just like a tonal thing where there are some times where I'm like, this is being played like in a very comedic way, and it's like the situation is like genuinely kind of terrifying for one of these people. There's some like really amazing like Hitchcock like reveals and or just like filmmaking flourishy things in this. Like right away our lead guy didn't write his name down.
I should write that stuff, but I don't.
I sometimes do, but I didn't remember to this time. Our action man is at like a
Richard Hannay.
Richard Hannay is at a sort of he's at a music hall, which we see in giant reveal of like letters across the screen. Music hall at a very rowdy like magic show where a guy is reciting
like
stuff from memory.
Vaudeville variety kind of thing.
Right. I wrote down Mr. Memory is a terrible magician. Because his whole thing is that he just remembers things and tells them to people.
Yeah, there's a guy in I haven't experienced him yet, but there's a guy over in Boulder, Colorado, half an hour away from me. He's a busker who appears on the street in Boulder a lot of the time, and he knows every zip code, and he knows facts about every zip code. So you can tell him a zip code and he'll tell you about your hometown.
Oh. Is he perhaps being used by foreign agents to steal state secrets in the form of zip codes?
I mean, maybe. A modern day Mr. Memory.
Yeah. But so Mr. Hannay runs afoul to this woman, Annabella, who tells him this whole story of how she is trying to stop a spy plot from happening. And it sounds very much like a con. She's like, hey, like, give me money and, you know, you can be involved in spy stuff.
Well, he doesn't, he's like, I don't believe you. but you can
he's like playing along, but he's like, fine, you can sleep on the couch. And then she busts into the room in the middle of the night with a knife in her back, which is a really nice reveal.
Yeah.
And forces him to go on the run. Otherwise, he will get blamed for murder. And she's told him that the head of the enemy spy ring is missing one of his fingers. That's how you'll be able to tell who he is. He's like running from the police, and there's a guy who goes, "What's all this?"
I love it when British guys say, "What's all this?"
Yeah, right. Because it's like you think it's just
they did it in
Invisible Man.
They did it
right?
in Invisible Man too. Yeah.
But there's a thing where there's spies following him, and he has to get a guy to like let him go. And he's like, "Oh, there's those guys over there. They're spies. They're following me." And the guy's like, "I don't believe you." He's like, "All right, you know what the truth is that I slept with this lady, and that's her husband across the street, and he's trying to catch me." And he's like, "Oh, in that case, go right ahead. Carry on."
He's staying in a hotel in this scene, and he's kind of like leaving the hotel, and there's a really fun part, also kind of getting at like the weird comedy of this movie, where like a housekeeper walks into the apartment and finds the body, and then she screams, and the scream, as soon as she screams, it cuts to the train of him leaving, and so she screams in the form of the train whistle, as it transitions to the next scene.
Incredible.
Which is like so good, so weird, so funny.
Yeah,
it's basically the opening scene from the Lost World, Jurassic Park 2.
But it's like, I don't necessarily know if this is the first instance of like that being used as an editing trick.
I mean, early sound, certainly.
But I think this is a notable enough use of it that things like Spielberg in The Lost World, or Ridley Scott in what's that movie, The House of Gucci, which I haven't seen, but I've seen there's one little bit where Jared Leto screams and it's a car horn. I would not surprise me if either or both of those are sort of like direct kind of riffs on that bit from this movie.
Oh yeah, it must be.
But it's great. I
so good.
Immediately after watching that, I'm like, I gotta put that in something. That's too good.
It's too good.
I gotta find some way of making money off of this. But while he's on the train, he's running from the police, and he does the classic forcibly kiss a woman to hide from the police trick.
Yeah.
Which then hilariously she immediately is like, "Hey, police, over here! This guy is a criminal."
It's a great thing. I mean, I think that whole dynamic works a little better for me rather than feeling like this kind of gross, misogynistic thing, because she doesn't play along,
Right.
like in a normal movie, in many movies, in many stories, like she would get wrapped up and she would be like, you're charming, I'm gonna help you out, I'll trust you for a second, but
Right,
in this movie she's just like,
no, get out of here, get away from me.
he's like, please just don't give me up, it's like it's life or death, you don't understand,
There's spy stuff happening.
she's like, whatever, man.
Yeah.
Bye.
Hitchcock is very good at this sort of thing where it's like they're running through the train and they go through like the kitchen car, and there's like a waiter with a bunch of dishes that they have to like push past and like get around and not spill the dishes, and then they run into a train car that's full of dogs, and there's like dogs in their
dog
way.
car. Yeah.
Every train has a dog car.
And it culminates in this like really cool like chase scene almost of like him getting on the side of the train and while it's moving, and like climbing along the side of the train while it crosses a bridge,
which is like any movie with like a chase on a train, like people like running around and on top of a train is Snowpiercer, Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning Part 1,
Transporter 2,
Transporter 3. Right, he got a map from Annabella leading to Scotland, so he knows he has to go somewhere in Scotland to prevent these vague state secrets from getting out. Very classic Hitchcock thing of like, what are they after? State secrets. What are they? Who cares? Classic MacGuffin thing. I don't even know if Hitchcock I don't know if he came up with the term MacGuffin or not, but he's definitely the person I think I most associate that with, of like a plot device that you don't actually need to know anything about. It doesn't matter.
Oh.
The bad guys.
I thought a MacGuffin was like a guy that's really good at combining everyday objects.
I know, that's a MacGyver.
Oh, that was so dumb. So he arrives he's kind of following this map, trying to figure out what his spy deal is, and he arrives at this small farmhouse, and he pays the guy that lives there to stay the night.
Mm-hmm. A suspicious Scottish farmer and his horny wife.
And it becomes very clear also they're weird religious, he comes in, they're like, okay, join us for supper, and he's like, we're saying grace right now, and it's this moment that I don't know, that scoffs at religion in a way that I would not have expected an older movie to do. It's very like, the movie is very much like, you the audience are on the side that like, this guy's being weird right now. Like
it's probably worth pointing out, since this is a British movie, it is not under the Hays Code.
Yes, but it has been approved by the British censors.
Right. Yeah.
The horny wife that lets him escape when the cops are able
I did
to
find
him.
that kind of funny, that it's like the Scottish farmer is like immediately very suspicious that it's like, this guy's like making eyes at my wife, and it's like, oh, they're plotting something against me or whatever, and it's like, no, they're actually just like trying to, she's like, here, have some blankets and some soup or whatever. But then it's like, as it goes on, kind of because he's being such an asshole about it, the wife is like, you actually seem cool, I kind of like you more than my mean old husband. Here, take his coat and escape.
My mean husband, who's
take me with
6
you.
times older than me.
Yeah. She like very kind of like longingly says goodbye to him when he escapes the house as the cops are closing in.
I won't forget this.
Right.
Thank you. And goodbye.
So he takes the farmer's coat, which looks like a really nice coat. I want that coat. A lot of great coats in this movie.
That's a U.S. coat.
Yeah, it is. And he's running through the Scottish Highlands when our old pal, an auto gyro, shows up.
When I saw this, I screamed out, auto gyro!
The second 30s movie to feature an auto gyro that we've talked about, which is funny that I knew auto gyros were a thing in the 30s, but I didn't expect them to be so ubiquitous.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only movies that I've seen them in are this, It Happened One Night, and The Road Warrior.
Right. Or The Rocketeer, which isn't a real one, I don't think, but he finally gets to the house he's looking for, and they come in. They're like, oh, we know who you are. Like, come on in. Like, and he's like, oh, finally, like people who understand the situation I'm in. Like, everything's cool. And he comes and like sits down in this nice library with this guy, and he's like, the guy clearly knows what's going on, and it's like, hey, just sit down, like have it, you take a load, like we'll send the police away. Don't worry about it. You're safe. And it's like, oh, phew. And then it's like, oh, I met this lady. She's telling me about all the spy stuff and to watch out for a guy with a missing finger on his left hand. And he's like, oh, you mean like this? And he holds up his hand. He's missing the finger. And it's like, oh,
so that moment is so good. It's such an amazing, like, oh shit moment, you know?
And it's a great example of like Hitchcock being very good at that type of thing. Intense sort of like tension and suspense and all the things that he's famous for. So then he's got to like escape from this place too. In addition to the police, he gets shot, but in a classic movie moment, he's got a book in his pocket that stops the bullet.
Yeah, a Bible, no less.
Yeah. Well, what else is thick enough to stop a bullet?
And it's the Bible that he got from the jacket
of
the weird religious guy.
It all connects. He like goes to the police, and the police don't believe him. And he like runs into a room where there's like a political speech happening, and he like pretends to be involved in this like speech and goes up and is like talking in front of a bunch of people.
He gets in there and they're all just like, oh, you're finally here. Great.
Yeah.
they just shove him up on stage. And it's this really funny scene where he has to kind of like bullshit his way through a speech as someone who he doesn't know. He doesn't know who he is.
I had forgotten the scene was in here, and it might be my favorite scene in the movie, of like the thing where it's like he can see the people he's running away from like coming in the back of the room.
Yeah.
And like you can like his eyes are glancing around, but he has to keep just like improving, making up a speech and like sound like he's saying something without knowing anything about what he's supposed to be talking about.
It's really good writing. It's like it's him trying to say like intentionally vague stuff that gets the crowd on his side.
Yeah. Right, he gets kind of picked up by the spy people again and handcuffed to the woman that he tried to recruit to his cause earlier that immediately sold him out. There's a really cool like camera transition here where like they're in the back of a car and the camera's in the back of the car and it kind of like moves like to the window and there's a hidden cut so it looks like the camera's moving out of the back window of the car.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
It's so good. It's like very seamlessly done. It's like you can tell what they're doing, that it's like they're kind of like hiding a cut in camera movement, but it's very slick. But then sheep are on the street and they escape, and now the rest of the movie is kind of like him and this woman are handcuffed and have to like are on the run together and have to like pretend to be married and to like go to a hotel, and she's like kind of trying to escape while they're doing that, and like
he's like pretending there's a gun in his pocket.
Yeah, it's actually like a pipe. But then it's like while they're asleep, she like slips out of the handcuffs and goes downstairs and overhears some of the like the enemy agents talking, looking for them.
Yeah, she doesn't believe his story. She thinks that he's just making it up to try and justify whatever he's doing.
Right, which then he responds to be like, well, if I'm not on the run from spies, that means I'm a murderer. So it's like, if you prefer that. Yeah. I get what this like rom-com section of the movie is going for, but I think it's just not quite charming enough to work for me entirely. It's like it's like too creepy by a hair. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
I think some of that might just be Hitchcock being a weird pervy creep, which like in some of his movies is like kind of enriches the movie because it adds this like voyeurism and this like playful kind of like meanness to it. But I feel like this stuff, I don't know, it's a little too, I don't know.
My partner was pointing out that like this like two people who are supposed to fall in love get or hate each other or whatever get handcuffed to each other thing is like an extremely common trope in like fan fiction, right?
Oh, really?
And like and like, you know, if you're thinking about Hitchcock in that kind of pervy way, then it's like, oh, maybe like this, there is a reason why he's doing this.
I mean, because there's a lot of bits, not bits, but just like scenes where it's like they're at the hotel and it's like she's trying to take her stockings off to dry them on the fire, and he's like, "Let me help you with that," and it's like, dude, this like she's already handcuffed to you, like.
It is kind of a funny scene of her like struggling to get her stockings off while she has a handcuff on, and his hand is just kind of like limp next to hers while she's like moving it up and down her leg.
Like I think Hitchcock wants this stuff to be like a little bit titillating, and I don't think it is, for me anyway. But it's just, yeah, it's slightly too creepy.
Yeah. This movie ends with confrontation back at the next Mr. Memory show, where they have finally like convinced some sort of authority figures to go along with them. Is that what happens?
Yeah.
And they're able to catch this transmission of information in the act. So the spy organization that's selling these state secrets is called the 39 Steps. And so Mr. Memory is being used to transmit this information. So when Mr. Memory goes up on stage, the Canadian guy, our main character, he starts like yelling, "Tell me about the Hannah." Yeah, he tells me, he says like, "Tell me about the 39 steps. Like, what are the 39 steps?" And you see the villainous 9-fingered man.
Who is a great villain, let me point out. Like,
yeah,
I forget that actor's name, but he's very good.
And he realizes that the jig is up. He shoots Mr. Memory and runs away. And Hannah like gets up to Mr. Memory and is like, "What are the secrets? What were you gonna give them?" And then he says like, "You're gonna release me of my duties. It's okay." And then he says yes. And so he starts saying like kind of reading off like military airplane specs.
Yeah, it's like airplane plans or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's like some kind of vague airplane technology that is kind of, he is memorized and is then going to transmit to the enemy.
Yeah, part of the whole idea with the spy intrigue is like they're trying to make sure these secrets don't get out of the country, but like they haven't been written down anywhere, and like there's no way that they can be taken away, and like they have their hands on the secrets, so like how could they?
It's like we have the secret plans like locked away, like no one's taken them.
Yeah, and it turns out that it was Mr. Memory who was going to get all the information out of the city.
I also think it's kind of interesting that this takes the kind of Top Gun approach where like it never specifies who like the enemy agents are or like who they're working for. It's just like some like foreign power is like after Britain's state secrets. And I feel like it might be like, I don't know how forward thinking they were in 1935 about like Nazis being warmongers. I think they had an idea though. They're like, well, they're rearming. This seems bad. What other militarized nation would Britain have been like afraid of in 1935, you know?
Yeah, I don't know.
Italy,
I
guess,
a lot of them
or Spain
were wary of the communists of the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
but
true.
It's not like it was.
It very easily could be a stand-in for them.
Yeah,
but it's like, yeah, every character in this just has an English accent. Like they don't try to. They're very vague
except
about
the
it.
original spy who he meets at the beginning. She has a kind of foreign accent.
Yeah, but I think specifically says that like she's like a mercenary, right? Like she works for Britain.
She said she works for whoever pays her the most, and Britain pays her the most now.
But I like that about it. I like how it's sort of like Hitchcock knows to be, what are the state secrets? Who cares? Like, who's the bad guys? They're the bad guys. Like, don't worry about it. Because I think at least in this movie, I think it works pretty well.
Yeah. Speaking of British people.
Speaking of action pictures, or a sort of like adventure movie. Not really action movies, adventure movies.
We're gonna talk about Captain Blood.
Captain
next.
Blood. What a title. Which is our first Michael Curtiz picture. He's a pretty notable director.
Of Casablanca fame.
Yeah. I was like reading up a little bit. I knew a little bit about Michael Curtiz. I didn't quite realize like how prolific he was.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the 1910s, he worked on the Danish movie Atlantis, which we watched.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, I think I remember us mentioning that.
Because he's credited under his Hungarian name, which I have written down. I'm not going to try to say it because I'm not going to do it justice. I'm just going to call him Michael Curtiz. He changed his name twice. Once when he was like very young, and then once when he immigrated to the States and kind of Americanized his name. But yeah, he made like a bunch of movies throughout Europe in the 1910s and 20s in like in Hungary, in Denmark, and he did a couple for UFA in Germany, and then the Warner Brothers, the actual brothers, kind of poached him.
Yakko and Wacko.
Come make movies in Hollywood. And so I think some point in like the late 20s he made the jump. This is also the first Errol Flynn like vehicle, really.
Yeah, he was a pretty new star at this point.
Yeah.
And this is his first leading role, I believe.
And it definitely feels like he is the kind of the movie heir to Douglas Fairbanks in terms of like a charming rogue who does swashbuckling things.
I think Fairbanks is more charismatic, though.
I also do, but I do think Errol Flynn is good at his own version of it.
Yeah,
and I feel like Errol Flynn is like such a kind of like classic old Hollywood figure almost.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, he's the guy with the mustache who like does sword fight movies.
Yeah, more or less.
He's who the villain of The Rocketeer is based on.
Right. It's sort of a almost foppish, but in a roguish tough way.
Yeah.
Debonair.
This is, I mean, Douglas Fairbanks made a pirate movie, The Black Pirate, that we did not watch, but it's like this feels like a Douglas Fairbanks movie in terms of like the tone of it, kind of what it's trying to, the type of movie that it's trying to be, but because it's made in the mid-30s
adventure movie. Yeah.
It does definitely have a different sort of feel to it because it's a sound movie and it has more of a like kind of like classical Hollywood feeling than the kind of like silent movie wackiness that
it's a bit more plotty than a Fairbanks movie could be, being silent.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's about a smarmy doctor who...
A very smug doctor. This is my favorite thing about the movie, is that it's called Captain Blood. It's about a pirate captain whose name is Captain Blood. That is not his pirate name. That is just his actual name. He's just a man named Dr. Peter Blood.
Well, hello, I'm Dr. Peter Blood.
That just happens to then become a pirate captain. Like, with a name like that, it was destined. Like, what other...
Oh, yeah.
You know... If your name is Peter Blood, you're gonna do some pirate stuff. And you live during pirate times. It's like, it's out of your hands at that point.
This is farther ahead in the movie, but like speaking of pirate times, there's a lot of fun but kind of clunky pirate lingo in this. Like, where Errol Flynn, who is Australian, is saying...
Right. He's Australian, but speaking in an English accent, and his character is supposed to be Irish.
Yes, right, exactly. And he says stuff like, "Come on, my hearties."
Come on, my hearties. Let's go. I guess he's kind of going for like a mid-Atlantic dialect. I don't know. He kind of just has like movie star speech.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how I would describe Errol Flynn just as a presence, is like a movie star guy. Like he's very pretty. Like he's good at doing like stunt stuff, and like he has a kind of a certain sort of innate charm to him. But at the same time, there is a kind of like he's much more. It feels like he's putting on a performance more than I think Douglas Fairbanks was. It feels a little bit more labored.
Also, like a movie star, he goes to William Randolph Hearst parties and has his own mansion with
like secret peepholes in it.
with secret peepholes and two-way mirrors, so that he can watch people in his guest bedroom.
Errol Flynn, probably not the best guy in real life. Probably, seemingly based on the fact that he has a mansion with peepholes in it, a real creepy perv and kind of a bad dude.
Maybe he takes the cake from Hitchcock.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like him and Hitchcock got along well. I feel like they did a lot of giggling about the creepiness they were both involved in.
At least Hitchcock is self-aware.
Hitchcock is horny on main.
Yeah, Hitchcock isn't. Hitchcock likes to make movies about peepholes, but he'll just look right at you instead of looking through.
And now for the peephole. Yeah, he'll just like fully just open a door and stare at you.
I think that Vertigo is Hitchcock calling himself out on in many ways, and and so I think maybe that awareness, it's the first step. It's the first step toward rectifying your shady behavior.
Apparently, Errol Flynn, being a sort of relatively unknown actor at the time he was cast in this, he got the part after Robert Donat, who is the guy from the 39 Steps, who plays the lead in that, Hannah turned it down because he had also done The Count of Monte Cristo, another like swashbuckling sword movie. Both Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland, who's also in this is like their first big movie, and their first big movie together. They kind of went on to do a bunch more, like they were like a frequent on-screen pairing. And this is the second Captain Blood movie. There was an earlier 1920s silent Captain Blood also.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, this movie, I was taken with how, kind of like Bride of Frankenstein, how like expressionistic the sets were, at least in the opening scene. They kind of lose that after this brief opening. But like early on, there's a lot of like, there's like a crazy like street sign that's like almost looks like an arrow that's like pointing towards the house and things, and it's very moody and expressionistic early on, and then it kind of loses that and becomes like we're on a pirate ship with a very obvious painted sky behind it. Which, as fake as that stuff looks, I find it very charming because it looks like Hook, or I should say Hook looks like this movie.
Oh yeah, it's good. And like also like there are parts where they're blowing up real ships too.
Dude, the ship to ship combat movie in this movie rules. All the like ships fighting, amazing. Like
there are like genuine like sailing scenes with humongous pirate ships. I think
some of them are like bigatures. They're like not full scale.
Oh, interesting.
Because looking at the water looks a little scaled down,
I see, yeah.
But yeah, the like special effects in this movie, the like sort of in-camera stuff. I don't know if there's a lot of like optical things in this. There's a couple like rear projection things, it looks like. But yeah, this movie looks great.
Yeah, looks expensive.
Yes, it looks extremely expensive. The first half of this movie, I'm not a huge fan of.
It definitely picks up a lot more once he actually becomes a pirate.
Right, because it's like Captain Blood. It's a pirate movie about this guy being a pirate. He doesn't become a pirate till halfway through.
It's like, is it going to be a pirate movie yet?
Yeah. The first half is him getting... so he gets imprisoned by the wicked English king for providing aid as a doctor to a wounded rebel. And he's like, but I've taken a Hippocratic oath. I must save anyone who comes into my home. Captain Blood is a very, what's the right word? Not smug. There's a better one. He's
self-righteous.
Very self-righteous, exactly. To the point where it's like a little silly.
He's like this very honorable guy who, he's among other kind of, after he's taken in, along with a bunch of other kind of rebels to, I don't know, whatever kind of civil conflict was happening in Britain at the time.
Mm-hmm. During pirate times.
The other people are like genuine criminals, but he is the nice one. He is He's the one who is taken in for being too good of a guy.
Right. They're like they're all in court, and everyone's like, "Ah, yes, I guilty, I guilty." And he's like, "I am innocent, and he like gives a whole big speech. Whenever he's like remotely called out for being like a criminal or a bad guy, he like gives a speech, and it's like he's always like he's a very like morally superior character, I feel like, which I think the movie's intention is for him to be like a very likable protagonist that like you can get behind, but it's like he does it so much that it's like, shut up, dude, come on.
Yeah.
Like let this guy be a little bit of a rogue, like let him be. And he does, like, that's almost, I feel like, kind of his arc, is he kind of learns to be a bit more of a roguish hero as opposed to such a kind of morally righteous one.
Right. As he becomes a pirate and realizes that basically it's a story about people becoming so ostracized and marginalized by society that they have no choice but to become criminals.
Yeah.
But they do it in a cool way, which is being pirates.
Yeah. Well, and then they save the day at the end, and
Yes.
therefore justify themselves being pirates. And also they're the cool pirates. All those other pirates are nasty. They have a code. They have the guidelines.
They have their own little pirate constitution.
Yeah, they have the what is it called in Pirates of the Caribbean? The like
I don't know.
I think it's just called the Pirate Code, right?
What's it called in One Piece?
But yeah, so the first half is like a lot of Dr. Blood, who I'll refer to him as that for the first half of the movie. Is sold into slavery in Port Royal, and he gets bought by Arabella Bishop, played by Olivia de Havilland, who's the niece of this awful slave owner, plantation owner guy. Arabella being like related to him, like it's the sort of thing where it's like she is also technically a slave owner, and yet she's kind of like supposed to be a heroic character, but whatever.
Well, she's the
she buys
good
Dr.
one.
Blood as like a sex slave, and then
and he like, I mean, kind of, but he also just resents her for it, right? She's like trying to do a nice thing. She's like,
right. She's like, this man is handsome. Let me buy him.
Yeah.
The start of any great romance.
And yeah, so he has a beef with her for having bought him.
I mean, understandably so.
Yeah. And so he's not very grateful for her kind of sparing him from the other buyer who would have brought him to toil away in the mines.
Yeah. This movie does have a very kind of like classically old Hollywood like romantic streak through it.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is, I think, like Peter Blood's like moral kind of righteousness, and it also the kind of the romantic subplot with him and Arabella is so, I don't want, it's like it's melodramatic, but it's also like every time they're together there's this like, you know, like tinkly music.
Yeah, like a soft filter over everything.
And it's like all of the dialogue is like so like flowery, and he's like, I would never have thought that a devil could have an angel for a niece. It's all like so dramatic and like, you know, in that kind of, but in a way that I found very entertaining.
Yeah, it's fun. I don't know if it's like good, but it's
well, I think the second half is good.
Yeah,
like the second half rules. The first half is like a bit of a drag because it's like this story about like slavery and like escape and fixing the governor's bad gout on his foot.
Yeah, a lot of gout jokes.
Right. It's like it's a story about, you know, slavery in Jamaica, and yet there's like two actors of color in this whole movie.
Well, and they're both
in
driving
the background.
A stagecoach.
Yeah. So it's I mean, I know that existed in like white people were sold into slavery in pirate times, but it does feel kind of pointed that it's like every character in this movie is like, why, hello there, sir. I say.
I don't know, it's weird because like she was trying to romance him, right? And then he kind of reciprocates, and she is like, oh my god, you're of much lower status than me. I cannot.
Yeah. They're very hot and cold, those two. But it looks like their kind of escape plan is not going to work out, but then there's a Spanish pirate attack. Some Spanish pirates attack Port Royal.
Some pirates ex machina.
Yes, and so they're able to use that as cover to like escape through the port and like steal one of the Spanish ships while it's empty. This whole scene feels very much feels like a predecessor to the Black Pearl attacking Port Royal in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Would not surprise me at all if like this is a reference point for that, just because like some of it might just be, I thought about that a lot watching this, of like newer pirate movies. I'm like, there's that thing, but part of that might just be like, it's a pirate movie. They all have certain set pieces and like things that happen in a pirate movie. Like
it was making me think about how I just went on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride for the first time recently, and thinking about how I didn't expect to get wet in that ride.
You're in the splash zone.
I didn't know that I just wasn't familiar with the Pirates of the Caribbean as a ride where you have to sit on a wet seat.
Oh, okay. I have never been on the ride, which it feels like an oversight.
It's cool. I like it.
I've been to both Disney parks, or both
really?
American Disney parks. Never been on Pirates of the Caribbean.
This is my first time at an American Disney park, and I had to do pirates.
Anyway, back to Captain Blood.
They're originally trying to escape on a ship that they contact a debtor, get a hold of some money, and they're like, we're gonna buy a ship to all escape on together. That plan falls through when their ship gets blown up in the chaos. And then they're just like, let's just take a Spanish ship.
Yeah, they say the boat's been sunk to the bottom of the briny. And so yeah, then they steal a pirate ship and are like, we're pirates now. We are going to write a pirate code and we are going to live as pirates.
As a brotherhood of buccaneers, they say.
Indeed. And then there's this like text on screen thing, and it's like, and then they became the best pirates in the world. And it's like, yeah, it would have been nice to maybe see some of that. There was like a kind of a very brief montage of like sword fights in there.
Right.
But it cuts from them like deciding to be pirates to then being the best pirates in like
clearly
a minute
they're
and
the best. They would become the best pirates because they're all righteous, good guys,
right?
Who are suave and they buckle swatches.
But I do think they spend so much time in the first half just in this sort of like setting up why these people would be pushed so far to like the margins of society that they would decide to be pirates to begin with. But I wish there was more of a like second act of them actually becoming pirates, I guess.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, all right, now that we're the best pirates, let's have like a different movie start. Before it does the time jump, the Colonel Bishop, who's the person who like had like bought all of them at auction,
the brutal ruler of the island as appointed by the king,
he like climbs aboard the ship and are like, oh, like you've saved us from those rascally Spanish pirates. And he's like, thank you for saving all of my money that they stole. And they're like, get out of here, and they throw him off the ship.
They initially want to hang him, and then he's like,
true, yeah,
that's too good for him. Throw him off the ship so that he can come back later in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. They almost say that, like that's kind of the degree to which they're foreshadowing it. Oh yeah, and then Errol Flynn says, desperate men, we go to seek a desperate fortune. And then the text on screen says, like, off they went, a ship, a handful of men, and a brain.
What do we do? What do we do, Genius Blood?
I guess that is kind of the thing that seemingly like sets Captain Blood apart from the other pirates, is that he's a smart pirate.
Yeah,
who
got
was
a
educated.
doctorate.
Yeah, exactly.
Captain Blood, PhD.
That's the sequel. And so then it's like, second half of the movie, they're already the best and coolest pirates around. Everyone loves Captain Blood for being such a good pirate.
To be fair, they're pretty good and cool.
Yeah, we pick back up in Tortuga, classic pirate location. Captain Blood is drinking with a French pirate named Lavassieur, played by Basil Rathbone, famous for being Sherlock Holmes, amongst other things. Yep. He plays French very well, I think. I like whenever he says Captain Blood, it's like Captain Blood. I feel like this character Lavassieur feels reminded me a lot of Belloc from Raiders. Which I think is probably not a coincidence. Like, it would not surprise me at all if, like, I think both Spielberg and Lawrence Kasdan have, like, cited Michael Curtiz as, like, a guy that inspired Raiders. Like, that was, like, kind of the vibe they were going for. It's like,
yeah.
oh, this is like a little bit of like a Michael Curtiz type of thing. And so it's like, oh yeah, I'm sure that was like, and then who's the villain? I don't know, like a mean French guy.
He's bothering Blood to kind of join up as the two strongest pirates.
He's kind of giving this sort of like, we're not so very different, you and I speech. Like, imagine what we could do together. Classic villain speech. And so Blood is like, sure, let's team up. And then, like, within the same sentence, like, regrets it. He's like, this was a mistake.
Yeah, he almost like turns to the camera and was like, shouldn't have done that.
But in a much more sort of like, oh, what have I done sort of way.
And then immediately, like, you know, it flashes forward, you know, maybe a couple months into them being pirate buddies. And immediately this guy is too French to stick to their code of don't take ladies as your property.
Yeah.
Hey,
right.
Stop stealing ladies.
Levasseur kidnaps Arabella and keeps her on an island. He's like, let all the other prisoners go, but I'm going to keep this one very attractive woman as my ransom. Captain Blood is like, not having that. So Captain Blood has a whole confrontation with Levasseur over this, where Captain Blood attacks him with logic first, and then with a sword second.
Which the pen should be mightier than.
Right.
But...
He kind of, in part of his logic attack, he's like, well, if I pay the ransom, then, like, she can come stay with me. And so he like, with a bunch of pearls, he buys Arabella from Levasseur. And Levasseur is like, how dare you, sir? I'm going to sword fight you. And so they have a sword fight on the beach. Which is the first, like, fight in the movie.
Takes an extreme glee in purchasing her.
Oh yeah, for sure.
After she owned him as a slave.
Yeah, because at first he's like, pretend that you don't know her, and she sees that he's shown up. He's like, oh, I'm a person that I know. Captain Blood is here, the nice pirate. And then he just like walks past her without looking at her, and he's really kind of like digging the kind of his superiority in this moment.
he's just lavishing it.
But so they have a big him and Levasseur have this big sword fight on the beach, which is pretty fun. Love a good beach sword fight.
Fencing.
I thought he was going to come back later. Nope.
Well, he stabs him too. He kind of dies pretty quickly.
And
there's some blood.
I was assuming that he wasn't really dead. I'm like, oh, Levasseur is going to come back. And it's like, oh, no, he's done. That's the end.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'd assume that if you get stabbed in the chest and then you're at, like, kind of lying down drowning height in the water, then you're probably as good as done.
I think it's maybe sort of maybe my modern movie sensibilities. I'm like, unless someone has their, like, head chopped off, like, they're going to come back in the third act, you know?
Yeah. We've already seen that water doesn't kill people because of the dad of Olivia de Havilland.
Right.
Which we're going to see him again in 1 second.
So then Captain Blood wants to take Arabella back to Port Royal to, like, return her there. And the crew was like, we don't want to go back there. Like, the entire British Navy's over there. And the guy that hates us. Like, and so they try to mutiny. But then Captain Blood is, like, so agreeable about it. He's like, yeah, okay, I guess you guys can mutiny. Like, you have a good point. And they're like, we take it back. We'll go to Port Royal.
It was such a weird moment. He's, like, reverse psychologying them.
Pretty much,
like,
yeah.
Doing like a yeah, just doing like a, oh, well, if I'm so bad, then go ahead, fine.
And they're like, no, you're not bad. We're sorry for mutinying. Which is, yeah, very funny. And then once they get back to Port Royal, though, they see that it's under attack by the French Navy. And they find out that the old mean English king is dead. And there's a new English king that is not as bad. And that England is now at war with the French, which is why this is happening. They find out that oceans are now battlefields. And so they're like, to arms! We're going to join up with the British again. We're going to fight off the French Navy. And we get this long extended like battle scene between multiple ships,
So
shooting
good.
cannons at each other and like swinging
Amazing.
across on ropes, and sword fights and grappling hooks and exploding ships. Oh, it rules. It's
Yeah.
it's all of the stuff that I wanted out of this movie is like packed into the last like 35 minutes of it.
Yeah.
But it's so good in that section that I'm like, it's been worth this like very belabored buildup. But it leaves off on like the best stuff, kind of.
Yeah.
And then because of this, Captain Blood gets elected mayor of Port Royal and gets to shove it in the bad guy's face.
Yeah, immediately
He's like, I'm gonna mayor your niece, and also I'm the mayor now. Deal with it.
well, yeah,
I'm gonna put my feet on your desk.
There's like an emissary from the king there, and he's like, if you defeat the French, then you get to be king of town. And
them's the rules.
the guy, what's his name? The mean guy who owned them,
Colonel Bishop.
Colonel Bishop. The reason why he's being deposed is because he was out hunting for Captain Blood on his vengeance quest, and then his city was attacked while his squad was out trying to find his pirate white whale. And so he comes back and he's just like, hey, guess what? You found me, and now I rule your city. And then the movie just ends as it began, with Peter Blood being smug.
Well, it ends with him and Olivia de Havilland both like cheek to cheek, like making smug faces at the bad guy.
Yeah. Which it's cathartic. It's fun. It's a really fun end.
Yeah. I do think the first half is like too long, and I wish there was more time dedicated to them. Like, I wish there wasn't that like very stark like time jump where it's like they start being pirates and then they're the best. But I think like the second half has so much fun stuff in it that it like it's well worth watching for that. And I mean there's fun stuff throughout, but yeah, it has a very, I've said this before on this episode, but it's like a very like old-timey Hollywood feeling to it.
Yeah. And that's it. That's all the movies.
Oh, great score on this too. I forgot to mention. By Korngold, a notable composer of film and music. I think that score really helps that sort of like old-timey kind of romantic drama feeling.
I'm glad we're getting scores now. That's we're getting into some good territory, and it's interesting, the early movies that didn't have non-diegetic scores, but you want to have them for a movie.
Yeah it helps a lot.
And that's it.
What was your favorite film that we watched?
It might have been Top Hat. I really had a fun time with Top Hat, and though it's not the best of its style of people are playfully mean to each other 30s movie, I still love those movies so dearly that number one spot.
Mine was definitely Bride of Frankenstein. I was really kind of very happily surprised at how good that was.
Olivia de Happily over here.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, cool. That's about it. Thank you all for watching and listening to this, which is surely to be one of our longer episodes. But
oh boy.
I think any time that we talk about, we broke our record with Birth of a Nation, and we had to say a lot about Triumph of the Will also.
Yeah, I guess it's true. I mean, that was our first movie, so we probably were a little extra long-winded because we were like just getting into it. But
we gotta, though. I mean, like, it's complex, and we need to talk about it.
Right. It's a movie that I think is unlike the other stuff. I feel like that one we're talking about like much like bigger like philosophical ideas almost of like what is indoctrination and like how does that work and like how does the media play into that,
Yeah, I think we solved the Nazi crisis in this episode, and we can call it a wrap now. So give us a like on Facebook and YouTube for solving the Nazi crisis, and that'll be it for this episode. Subscribe and all that jazz, and
I wish it involved more punching.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah. We need to edit people into Triumph of the Will, just punching every Nazi.
Punched.
We'll
just
put
edit in a bunch of clips from Indiana Jones and Hellboy.
Yeah, we'll edit in a bunch of like Street Fighter guys at put them next to every single Nazi. So we have
Just
50,000 Nazis and 50,000 little animated Street Fighter guys.
But see, now that you've said that, now I have to, for at least one shot, I have to try that now.
Do it. All right. Again, send us a like for defeating the Nazis, because that's something that we did. And thanks for listening. Appreciate you all for listening. Come back for 1936.
Yeah.
And Glenn, speaking of 1936, I'll see you next year.
See you next year.